I've been having a weird day. This hasn't been getting any better. Is that working? That is working. Yes, that is working. Oh, that's good. It's working. Let's go to that. Check it. That's working. Okay. To the mouth. Yeah da 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 da. So, hello everyone, and okay, now I can realize why I can't see. Okay, so. Hello. What's wrong with the camera? Oh! Yep, that would explain it. Sorry about that. Just a small issue there. The iron brew bowl. The iron brew bowl was kind of in charge. Hello, everyone. How are we all doing? I hope you're well and enjoying life. We have quite an interesting discussion today. It's bringing in the heavies, AA crews in World War II, what was their value. And yeah, as you can see, I now got May, June, July done. And I'm going to do a vote soon for August. And basically August, and I'm going to plan sort of maybe August and September maybe to combine together. But pretty much I've basically decided the specials are going to be extra videos which fit in, because my plan is, while I'm away, there will be a video come out on Japan. All details for Japan it will be published quite soon. All the fundraising and stuff, games for it, everything should be coming out soon. Will be Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday. There will be videos guaranteed, and hopefully I'll record them for Friday as well. And there'll be lives on the Sundays while we're wandering around. And hello, Engaging Strategy. Hello, Malaga. Hello, John Beagle, the Devil Dad. Hello, Paul Amos. Hello, Beno. Hello, Raptorat. Hello, Minecraft Watcher. Hello, Wayne. Hello, Runon. And yeah, we will see. We will see. Some of you might notice that I've got running in the background, although we're not using it today, the bot, to see if we can figure out what's wrong with it and see if we can get it working. I didn't actually start it till after we'd started the live. Normally I have it running before the live has even begun. Today I didn't start it till we started the live. So if that turns out to work better with YouTube, that's the policy we'll keep to in the future. And today we are talking, as said, about bringing in the heavies. AA crews in World War II, what was their value? And the fun thing with this as a topic, and the really fun thing with this topic, is this started off as a discussion a lot earlier than we often think it did. It really does start off as a discussion a lot earlier than we often think it did. It's one of those things whereby people go, well, hang on, how early could it have started off? Now, here is the fun bit. We have, when we officially think it started, its discussion point. We really do have when we officially think it started its discussion point, and we have when it is first documented. And the trouble is with documentation is I can show you the documentation that is publicly listed, publicly published, and I can show you the official records which survive. What I can't show you are the records which don't survive and the discussions which take place beforehand. The thing is, though, I can give you estimates, and I'll explain those as we go through it. And that is something which is kind of an interesting thing to get into, because when we're talking about this particular topic, the conception point we normally link to and normally do focus in on is an American one. Okay, it's the American Navy. And that makes, to an extent, some sense because they're thinking about these things. But also, they publish more. The US Navy publish a lot more than the Royal Navy do in terms of their thinking, usually earlier on. This is a paper actually you can look up for free. By the way, for those who don't know, you can go onto the USNI website and you can get 5 articles for free a month without signing up and being a member. I tend to look up what you can see for free versus what you can see for a membership, if you have a membership, when I'm trying to do these videos, because I want everyone to be able to access the stuff if they can if it's websites without having to pay. But I will recommend looking into the USNI, because if you can pay for it, you get a really good deal on a lot of interesting history. And there is a guy called Lieutenant Franklin G. Percival, who writes a really nice long document, which, by the way, I do have a Word file version of, because as much as I loved USNI, and as much as my system of internet is janky but works, in terms of me having 2 internet streams coming together, I honestly do need to upgrade to a proper, what's it called, load balancing router. And the reason I need to do that is to get them to properly work together. I've done a system which is very sensible and works for less than 90 quid, which is great. Probably need to, and that's great, but it works for a janky 90 quid. I'd probably need to spend the money and actually get a decent load balancing router to make it work properly. Means the habit, I tend to copy interesting documents which I find on websites into Word documents if I can't get them any other way, add a link and add in notes as to the date and organization I copied it from, so I can use it as a referenceable material in future. And so I do have this file as a Word document. Before USNI gets upset with me, I'm not distributing it to anyone, it's just for my own notes, because the internet goes down. And the full document is worthwhile going to read. Honestly, Elements Contributing to Aerial Superiority is worthwhile going to read as an essay in 1931, because it shows where the discussion has reached in certain points in the American Navy, in the US Navy. And it shows you where it's coming from. And it's when you start to look at the discussion you realize they're looking at far more combined arms approach to threats than we potentially give them credit for. And honestly, a far more combined arms approach than you'll see discussed in a lot of newspapers and publications today when we're talking about various threats, which often are treated as, there's this threat and this is the solution, and therefore it's a one-dimensional option. It's not that way. The interesting point is, in this paper, and by the way, his other paper he does on this is previously roles of cruisers, and it's really interesting putting the two together, because he puts in the summary of this paper, there is a tendency to think of aerial superiority, and I have no idea why he's putting 2 dots above the E, but I must presume he's decided aerial is a French word, almost entirely in terms of aircraft strength, and to ignore the equally important element of anti-aircraft strength. Aircraft strength should be augmented by building up to the treaty limits of carrier tonnage and by developing our merchant marine rather than by building hybrid types or by overloading existing gun vessels with airplanes. A fleet lacking in anti-aircraft strength will inevitably be driven out of the air by a fleet of equal strength which has developed an adequate gun defense against aircraft. If two fleets equally lacking in anti-aircraft strength should meet, the result will be decided by chance. A fleet lacking in anti-aircraft strength cannot take on the offensive against even a much weaker fleet. The building up of our anti-aircraft strength is therefore vital to our security. Pardon me. I do apologise. I sent some iron brew down the wrong tube. I do apologise. Anti-aircraft strength may be augmented by development of suitable weapons, instruments, types of ships, and tactics. Except for building a fleet flagship and possibly a relief flagship, we should utilise our unexpended balance of cruiser tonnage for types calculated to add to the anti-aircraft strength of the fleet rather than to its aircraft strength. Our Navy is not prepared to meet the situation which would confront it if war should break out tomorrow, in that individual ships and the fleet as a whole are lacking in anti-aircraft strength, in that some current tactical ideas need modernisation, and in that we lack the improved types of aircraft, submarines and listening devices needed for the service of information security. The production in the shortest possible time of the enormous amount of material required is a vital problem. Turning those problems over to commercial concerns, offering either cash prizes or substantial contracts as incentives, has produced consistently excellent results. The Navy Department will have all that it can do in solving those problems which cannot be solved elsewhere. The way out of our difficulty lies, therefore, in the maximum utilisation of private enterprise and individual genius. I know, that's all very new stuff, but that was literally someone writing in 1931. That was literally someone writing in 1931. And that is usually what's discussed as this is the point at which we can look at AA cruisers and they exist. That's the point at which they're coming through. But yeah, we know other navies have been looking at it earlier in some of the design practices. We know some of the discussions that have been going on in the Royal Navy. We know some of the discussions that are going on in the US Navy. But the thing is that this is the public announcement of an anti-aircraft cruiser. This is the public proclamation. This is what, if you ask Norman Friedman, he will date it to. Which is actually a really interesting thing, because if you talk to him, he'll go, it came about much earlier than that. It's probably something they're talking about in the 1920s. But it takes time for it to go from bubbling conversation and musings to something that's actually written about. And that is the problem. It takes time. Shurmak. Franklin G. Percival is perhaps the most Royal Navy officer-sounding name that I've ever heard about as an officer having had. Oh, it gets better. Go look him up. The guy obsesses over cruisers. Honestly, Franklin would have fitted in the Royal Navy so well. He really would have. He really would have. And the US Navy as a whole, they're worried. They are worried. They're thinking this stuff through, but they are worried about their approach to aircraft, to naval aviation. And that's the problem. Is it's one thing knowing you have a problem coming. It's one thing having a theoretical solution. It's still a third thing actually being able to implement a solution. And one of the interesting things is, immediately here, he's talking about private industry and private industry and private industry, private enterprise, ingenuity, and cash prizes. It's a very American approach, I would say, for the for the navies at the time approach, because if you consider in the Royal Navy, the policy probably would have been to pass it on to the constructors to try and figure something out. But again, the reality of it is also, if you start making conversions or anti-aircraft cruisers in the 1920s, what guns are they going to have versus what guns do you want them to have later on? Because one of the problems here with Franklin's writing, and this is the interesting thing that comes on, if you consider the guns available in 1931, if we consider the firepower they have in 1931, what guns are viable, what operations they can give you, there's a problem there. There really is a problem there. And, well, that's what they're going to have. They have to try and figure out a way to deal with. Well, they have to try and figure out how they're going to manage, and how you improve upon it. Any solution you take earlier is going to be less effective than ones you take later. And I know that last bit. Sorry, I was distracted a bit because some reason I started dropping frames dramatically, and so I was sort of distracted as it went down into the red and then popped up, and I have no idea why that happened. No idea. So apologies. The 5-inch 38's on its own. No. Let's be honest. If the British build a AA cruiser in the late 1920s, early 1930s, it's going to be armed with 4-inch guns. And engage strategy, I haven't even got on to the actual fire control, because the first point at which to make an anti-aircraft cruiser work is you need some guns. Fire control is what you do with them. If you haven't got the guns in the first place, there's kind of no point in having the fire control. You first need the guns, and then you need to develop the fire control. And that's also something which they're going to have to work on. A lot of the fire control systems we're talking about don't come out till much later. But there again, that's the process of things. Because first you identify there's a problem. Then you identify a solution. And then you identify how you're going to make that solution work. And again, Michael Cooch, I see what you're saying, but an early armed AA cruiser could be upgunned, retrofitted later. Can it be? Because you think about it, if the Royal Navy builds an AA cruiser built around a twin 4-inch guns, can they upgrade it to 5.25-inch guns later? Because let's be honest, it's far more difficult to upgun a ship than it is to downgun a ship. I can stick twin 4-inch mount on a position which has had a single 6 because of the weight bearing. I can't stick a 5.25-inch twin 5.25-inch turret on something which had a twin 4-inch mount. It's a very different weight load. And I'm going to say hacks not as bad. No, hacks. The high angle control system was not as bad as it's made out to be by some, but there's a lot of retroactive America great, Britain terrible ideas which go around, which cover up for a lot of the decisions made by various different organizations in the run-up to World War II. That's the issue. Honestly, the interesting thing is, if you have had an early 1930s approach to producing some AA cruisers, you probably, for the British, it's the 4.7-inch gun which is worked on, and they probably have a dual-purpose 4.7-inch. In which case, we're probably looking at something like the turret which goes on the L class. Something like the turret which goes on the... Is it the L class? Or is it the J's? Brain engage, Alex. Brain engage. L's or J's. Could be the... I think it's the L class. I'm going to check the L class first, just from... Because, you know... Brain engage. Yeah, it would probably be the 4.7-inch 50. The Mark 11. And that would have actually been interesting, because if, considering when that was developed, and it was designed officially in 1937 to 39, but they've been working on something similar to that from about 1930 onwards. For it to be a properly dual-purpose AA gun, and on a cruiser you would have the space and stability you could do it, it could probably still depress -10, but probably would have to go up to 80 degrees of elevation. So it would have to have at about 95 degrees of transverse. You could probably do that. And you could probably do that with that sort of system and get it up to 10 plus rounds a minute, and you'd have a perfectly decent weapon system for a cruiser, for an AA cruiser. Would it be as good as the 5.25 in the anti-surface role? No. Would it be as long range in the AA role? No. Would it be suitable? Probably. And again, if we consider the US Navy in 1931, what they probably would get, well, that's a little bit different, because usually at this point I go to my friendly Navy WEPS site and I start look through the various gun options they have, and honestly, we are probably looking at the 5-inch 25s, and maybe the 5-inch 38, but that's kind of a bit late. So it's the 5-inch 25s we could be talking about, and that's not a useful weapon at all in terms of its likelihood of being a viable weapon system for them. But the 5-inch 38 is designed in 1932. So, honestly, there is a possibility you could get a 5-inch 38 cruiser. AA cruiser. But the thing is, a ship armed with only 5-inch 38s, is that really going to be useful for the AA work? Is that really going to be useful for the AA work? As an AA cruiser in the early 1930s. Even Kenny, does an internal British account that makes hacks look absolutely terrible? Yeah, there are. But they're not. It's not. Ethan, there's a lot of interesting things done post-war when it comes to hacks. Hacks is not... I've done a lot of work on hacks and the high-angle control system, and its ability to control and fire control, and its main weakness is the systems it wasn't designed for, the scenarios it wasn't designed for. But it's still a pretty good system, and when you consider they consistently update it through the war and it adapts those systems, it does have some good advantages. And it does allow for good situational awareness, and when used properly, it certainly does seem to be a very useful fire control system. It's one of those things. Is it the best dual-purpose fire control system developed? No, because one of the things it is better at long-range engagements with aircraft, and it starts to have problems once they get to short and medium ranges. But remember, the high-angle control system is literally about that, controlling at high angles. And the Royal Navy's and the functions of what have been designed to deal with. Honestly, I would argue the fuse-keeping clock is probably one of the better fire control systems of World War II. And that can be used for all sorts of interesting things and adapted. Yeah. Did I miss your 10-month sub-update? I do apologise, Jonathan Moon. It didn't show up in my chat, and my combined chat. I do apologise. And the proximity shell is definitely a game changer for guns and for all AA firepower. But again, the proximity shell is one of those interesting things. That's why it's called a VT fuse, because it's a variable time fuse. Basically, it's when it detects the target being close enough. But it's a game changer. But again, it's not a concept which is new in World War II. There have been talkies about the idea of it for a while before World War II. It's kind of like radar. Radar is first conceived as an idea. They're discussing about its options back in the 1900s. You can sort of get data about it. It's World War II by the time it's implemented. And this is the trouble with a lot of these things. The Americans are the first to get a working one in World War II. But yeah. But the thing is, and I would like to point this out, one of the problems you get into in a lot of this historical discussion, and it comes up a lot for historians like me, but especially naval historians, is I've spent a few minutes answering questions on hacks. I'm sure there'll be this one comment going on, well, you're saying the American system was good, and why aren't you saying that? And I'll be going, well, no. I can argue the hack system be good. That doesn't mean the American system isn't good. In fact, the American system is better in many ways than hacks, but also it does have some weaknesses versus hacks in terms of how it interfaces with the rest of the ship and the rest of the system. In that, no system built in World War II, and even today, is perfect. Every system is always a compromise to an extent based on the realities of the situation they face. It just is. I'm sorry. That might sound like heresy for me to say it. But no system is perfect. Even my beloved tribal class destroyers, as much as I love them, they are not perfect. As beautiful as they are not perfect. And it's one of the interesting things to think about is that arguably the British work into this, it leads, of course, to the Dido and the Tribal. The Tribal is a gun cruiser, is a gun destroyer, which is a gun-focused destroyer, and the battles, etc., which are these destroyers which are very heavily armed in AA terms for their times. But as I've said before about the Tribals, the problem is they have their guns are low angle, their guns aren't high angle. Their 4.7s aren't high angle, are they? And the problem with that, the reason they have that is because of the, as I've said before, the false positives of the exercises. It's one of those curious things of human history. The Royal Navy in this choice is actually hoisted by their own petard. They've done so many, their own so many exercises, so many tests, and they've shown that, whenever they can, the pilots head for the carriers and the capital ships and occasionally the cruisers. They don't bother about the small fry, they go for the big things. And you think, okay, so this means in combat, that's what they're going to head for. So we arm our destroyers to suit that. So they're best for engaging that. Because they're rarely going to go for the destroyers themselves. Which makes sense in an exercise where I'm not going to die if I lose. But if I win and take out a carrier, I'm a hero. I'm getting free drinks tonight. It makes sense. And by the way, it's not just the Royal Navy which is hoisted by this one. So is the US Navy. So are countless navies. Pretty much every navy that does the testing in the 1920s and 30s has the same conclusion. Pretty much every single one. The difference is some of them have a couple of years of war fighting to go, oh, we're not involved in that, and oh, frigate, their destroyers are, oh, yeah. And some of them have been less sure on it. Or they've produced only one mount anyway, and oh, thank Lord. That works. We're getting to the Atlantas. But this, I wanted to read this out because I thought you'd all enjoy this, because this comes from 1936-37 time. And actually, I could have got you to two versions. I could be reading to you from the perfect version, or I thought you'd like to see how the documents often look in there, certain sections of documents, with bits scribbled out and corrected, etc., in blue ink. This is how I often find the most interesting information out about, because this is also where I often find notes written by various senior officers complaining. The smaller Dido class have been designed for a very different function. In a well-balanced fleet, it is very desirable to have a type of ship for reconnaissance work and in low visibility or at night for screening the battle fleet from destroyer attack at night and for support of our own flotillas during action. This type has a function in the tactical plan of battle which results from experience. Exhaustive trials have been made in the past to test out the various type of cruiser in day and night action, and the large type of cruiser is unsuitable on account of her large silhouette and unnecessarily expensive for this function. The Dido class have all the qualities necessary for this fleet work. It is not necessary for them to carry sufficient armament to fight an enemy heavy cruiser. Simultaneously, with the decision to build this small fleet type of cruiser, the combined high-angle and low-angle 5.25-inch gun was perfected, and this has provided a valuable opportunity of not only giving these small carriers, well, on board these small cruisers, a low-angle armament of sufficient power for their function, but also a powerful high-angle armament to supplement the high-angle fire of the fleet, both at sea and in harbour. Now, you might be thinking, Alex, but they built them as AA cruisers, but they're making it sound like the AA function is a byproduct of it. And guess what? It is, because repeatedly the Royal Navy were told in budget discussions they didn't need this sort of thing. So, Henderson came up with a cunning plan. It's not an AA cruiser, AA cruiser! Yes, you thought it was just HMS Unicorn, the forward aviation support ship. Honestly, not an aircraft carrier that he did this with. No, he did this with a couple of times. He really, really did. And so you have to remember the Dido class are fleet cruisers, flotilla support, not flotilla leaders. That, remember, is the tribal class. And screening cruisers. And in fact, the Royal Navy's been talking about screening cruisers in their requirements for the future fleet for a long time by this point. And they've kept doing studies of what would be screening cruisers. And screening cruisers, once you start reading through the data and looking at information, very quickly it seems to look like code for AA cruisers. But again, because of the situation of Britain and the Admiralty found itself in, where it wasn't even allowed to be the anti-aircraft expert in its own service. That was supposed to be the Royal Air Force, advising on high-angle control system and all these things through the Air Ministry. And it wasn't allowed to procure its own aircraft, and it wasn't even allowed to really train its own pilots and organise its own fleet air arm. It could just request things, and they would hopefully sort out for the better. It's had to be very circumspect about how it does it. I do love how this chat has now got so used to me talking about the various ships and Admiral Henderson that they now go, that's just Henderson. To be honest, I think if there is one officer who even Admiral King would have loved to procure from the Royal Navy for the US Navy, it would have been Henderson. Honestly, a king, if he'd had had a Henderson to manage his politicians, the things he could have got. The things he could have got. Oh. Now, what is a torpedo bomber if not a very fast destroyer? Yeah. And the other thing he writes is in this same document he's written is, of course, the reconnaissance role for cruisers is less of important now, as we have the value of aircraft carriers and aircraft for this role, which means the screening value for cruisers has increased. Now, if we compare this, and I do want to quickly, I've discussed the Royal Navy side of this, but I also want to discuss the American side of this, because really the two AA cruisers that are actually produced are the Didos and the Atlantas. The Atlantas are a different scenario than the Didos. They really are. But they are similar in a way as well, because the Atlanta class, remember, they are classified as scout cruisers, flotilla leaders, or destroyer leaders. Again, they are not actually classified as anti-aircraft cruisers when they are being designed and procured. The US Navy is doing exactly the same thing as the Royal Navy. Just the Royal Navy is also procuring the tribal class as flotilla leaders, aka cruisers, but we're not caught there in cruisers in destroyer form. As I tend to call them cruiser-built destroyers. And they're getting the Didos, which are also cruisers, but they are designed to engage things like enemy destroyer flotillas, but they are screening cruisers. They are for reconnaissance work, really, after we just spent the last 2 pages emphasizing carriers' roles in reconnaissance, in low visibility or night, for screening the battle fleet from destroyer attack at night, and for support of our flotillas during action. So pretty much, the same reports, by the way, and the same studies allow him to procure both the tribals and the Didos. They are procured from the same study. They came from the same analysis paper. The Atlantas are kind of the same thing in that regard. They are procured under a different requirement. They are procured under a requirement for, we want this. Now, I would also add something else, because you have to remember there's a reason I've talked about the Didos first and then the Atlantas. And the main it's this, because the Atlanta is laid down on the 22nd of April, 1940. HMS Dido was laid down on the 26th of October, 1937. So, roughly 2.5 years earlier. But here's the thing. I saw in one book there was something which was really wrong. It was put in that the Atlantas were ordered as a direct experience of watching the Didos in action. That's physically impossible, because Dido herself isn't commissioned till September 1940. And admittedly, she is commissioned after Phoebe, who's also commissioned in September 1940. And you do have Bonaventure, which was commissioned in May 1940, and a few which are in sort of July 1940, etc. But realistically, that's not much of experience to justify something being laid down in April 1940. In fact, it requires time travel for it to be possible, because, as said, Bonaventure, the first to commission, is May 1940. 24th of May 1940. Atlanta's laid down the 22nd of April 1940. San Diego is laid down on 27th of March 1940. Do you get the point here? They are laid down 2 months in advance of these ships commissioning for the Royal Navy. No, it's not a case of the Americans reading the British playbook. It's a case of both the Americans and British have been reading the same playbook and have been working on the same ideas. It's just when they finally get funding to implement those ideas. The British, unsurprisingly, got the funding in 1937. As I've said before, if you remember correctly, I've always said this, in 1930, they agreed to the London Naval Treaty. In 1932, they finally say the 10-year rule is over because they think war's going to come within 10 years. In 1937, they really actually end the 10-year rule. But there's been 5 years of it being, let's try and get a second London Naval Treaty. Let's try and stop this. Let's not actually do investing, because if we do, we might start a war. Worried the whole time. It's been really annoying for the service to deal with. And then in 1937, they finally go, okay, here's the funding. And that's, by the way, when Admiral Henderson goes, oh, goody, here are my designs. Build! And all sorts of things start racing towards the shipyards. And there you go. That happens. For the US Navy, they have to wait to get the funding cocks released. Till they, get the corks, taken out and gone, we've been, with the corks being released, the bottles open, let the funding roll. They have to wait a little longer. So, the point of this is that they started thinking about this in the 1920s. They really did start thinking about the 1920s. And you get the first public discussions in the early 1930s. And then it's the late 1930s by the time you actually get something built. And that's not unusual. If there are any delays here that are packed on, it's because of the lack of funding. If Britain had truly ended the 10-year rule in 1932, honestly, if we consider the Dido class are an adaptation of an Arethusa class hull, the Arethusas are laid down in 1933. So honestly, you probably do get Minotaur, Plintheus, maybe a continuation of the Arethusa class batch 2 as some AA cruisers, alongside the Town class being ordered. That's probably what you'd see. And if the British are doing that and the Americans are going for parity again, the Americans might build something as well. But honestly, in the early 1930s, the Americans are focusing on their 8-inch cruiser builds, and that's what their focus is all about. That's what their obsession with the First London Naval Treaty was all about. Their parity, their heavy cruisers, their cruiser construction was all they were sort of really thinking about for national status. And the trouble is, that's what the politicians are focused on. The Navy might want something else, but the Navy can't necessarily get funding. Again, as I've said before, there are some admirals who are good at getting funding out of governments. And there are some admirals who aren't. Britain is very lucky in the late 1930s. They have an admiral who is very good at getting funding out of governments. And even he doesn't get everything he wants. Even he doesn't get everything he wants. So, with that being said, Makuch, did the Dido class design learn any lessons from the C-class conversions? Nope. Most of the conversions happened after the Dido class had actually started construction. So there's nothing taught to them there. Clarke Bay, Air Ministry, Royal Air Force having control over pilot training in all aircraft makes some sense. Maybe it's much disguised, but have they also been in charge of A? Okay, so whenever the Royal Navy was trying to get budget consultations on investing in programs to develop anti-aircraft or anti-aircraft weaponry, it was required that they consult the Air Ministry as the air experts to tell them exactly how ships would be attacked. The Air Ministry maintained right up until about 1938 that the way ships would be attacked at sea would be by level bombing from heavy bombers. And that will be the primary method of engagement of ships. and torpedo bombers. So it would be low-level aircraft coming in at a fixed altitude to try and drop torpedoes, or high-level aircraft dropping bombs. And when you consider hacks and its development and its procedures, you will see a lot of those thinking involved in that. So that's where it comes in, Gokbei. How disguised, misguided, I know. 96831, the Didos were not supposed to replace the World War I Dyna and C-class light cruisers. They're not. I'm not sure where you're getting this from. That's not their role at all. The Cs and Ds are not being replaced that quickly. If anything, the replacement for the Cs and Ds in their role as trade protection ships is going to be the Crown Colonies. That fits far more their protection. Think more of the Didos as like the Vanguard option in cruiser form. It's a way of rapidly expanding cruiser numbers. And it's giving the Royal Navy a viable ship. But we'll get into that when we get into the actual next slide. I've got to look more through some of the World War Warships cruiser designs and stuff. John Evans, it might save weight, but will it fit within the framing? Will it fit within the hull ship? And would the ship have a separate gun battery? Again, we're talking about the separate 4-inch guns and low-angle main battery. That would be if the ship would have that. If we're talking about an AA cruiser built in the 1930s, it wouldn't have it. It would have a combined main armament. And nicely, everyone, the number of ships which fall victim in World War II to submarine attacks, it's not sort of falling victim, it's the enemy get to vote. You get hit by a torpedo, you're going down. So did the RFUsers. So did quite a lot of cruisers. They get hit by, if you're a smaller ship, then you don't need as many torpedoes to sink you, especially if they sink you and hit you in the right place. Sure, Mac. The US was copying Iran's. The US was saying to similar conclusion versus vis-a-vis the need for a screening cruiser because they're both planning for war against Japan and the Japanese tactical system. To an extent, I'd say it's both. They're both planning for war against a similar problem. And I'd say that's where the screening cruiser idea comes from. That's their role. Any chance going back 40 seconds? But this is why I'm pausing occasionally to answer questions. And if there's anything you think I missed and you missed, just tell me. Sorry, the ads are supposed to be every half an hour for an individual person. So you're not supposed to have more than one ad in any half-hour period. But I'm not sure what YouTube's doing on that. I do notice an annoying thing when you're sort of watching the smaller channels. We do have to have the ads on. To get any play, it seems, in the logarithm, but it is annoying. Cameron Ray, how good were Didos and Atlantis in anti-surface versus anti-air, especially compared with contemporary light cruisers and destroyers? They're very good against other destroyers. They're okay against other light cruisers. Honestly, the Didos are probably slightly stronger in the anti-surface versus the Atlantas, but the Atlantas are probably slightly stronger in terms of volume of fire for anti-air. But there again, the Didos have a slightly longer range. So it depends on what your situation you're dealing with, which one is better than the other. It's kind of like half a dozen one, 6 of the other. They're different approaches to the same problem. They're kind of like, I often say the Didos and Atlantas give you a good idea as to the differences between the Maltas and the Midways. If you'd seen the Maltas and Midways next to each other, actually built, they're the British and American perspective on their solution to their ultimate solution to the same problems from their different backgrounds, and it's the same with the Didos and Atlantas. And this is why they are as close as they are, and why when people try and go, this one's overwhelmingly better than the other one, I look at them and go, you're being nuts. They're not, and they're never going to be, because they're designed by to deal with a pretty similar problem by people who are at a pretty similar technological position in their lives and with pretty similar skill sets and understanding of naval warfare. That's going to result in a pretty similar solution, although it's going to be orientated to their specific needs. So it is going to have some advantages over the other system, and the other one's going to have some advantages over that system, and that's just the way it's going to be. Hello, Timu. Sure, it's also interesting to note that at the time when the Didos are ordered vis-a-vis the dropping of the 10-year rule and the US ordering the Atlantas vis-a-vis the 2-Ocean Navy Act. Yeah, it's pretty much the moment we have the funding, we order these because they are a quick way to increase our numbers, which is something very useful. Yeah, it's the Crown colonies that are replacing the C's and D's. It's the Crown colonies. Maybe. So that said, let's consider the Didos. Let's consider them both in conception and as they really were. One of the things you realise about these ships is that, as designed, they're supposed to have 5.25-inch guns. Now, some of them don't end up getting them because the 5.25-inch guns are always in a problematic place in terms of development. Some of them end up with, how do I put this, with a different firepower, with a very differential firepower, because there isn't enough available. There's Phoebe, when she completes, actually completes with a 4-inch gun in the, I think is it a twin 4-inch or something, in the position of C mount, because there aren't enough 5.25s available. And actually there's a few people who quite like that. There's a few people who are quite keen on that as an idea, and there's quite a few officers who look around and go, well, the twin 5s are great, dual purpose, but having a dedicated twin 4-inch is at the top does help. But the 5.25s, and this is the reason I chose Argonaut, is she's as they were supposed to be in this picture. They are conceived as having good all-round fire. They are conceived as having good all-round fire. They'd seen action throughout World War II, and we'll be talking about their action. What basically we're doing is, prior to the Shameless Book Plug, we're talking about the ships and the conception, and then after the Shameless Book Plug, we're going to talk about their operations, their scenarios, their experience in war. These vessels were, in many ways, they are victims of the 10-year rule and the progress of war. There is the argument that Sicily and Heavies, with their 4.5-inch guns, are actually far closer to the AA cruiser role, but that's the problem. Because people perceive them as being AA cruisers, and as I've said before, they're not. They're not AA cruisers. They're screening cruisers. There is a difference. There is a very big difference in this. The firepower they offer, though, is critical. When built for the fleet, you could really see where their role was going to be. They were going to be positioned in screening operations, either behind destroyer formations, rather like tribals would be at the front of a destroyer attack, trying to clear the enemy out of the way for the other destroyers to get through. The Dido was supposed to be coming up from behind the flotilla, providing enough of the destroyers attacking to provide firepower that would overwhelm any positions of resistance of the enemy and support the destroyers moving forward. In this regard, they are built with the speed and maneuverability of that role in mind. They really are built to maneuver with the destroyers, to fight with them and support them. Now, moving on from that, in terms of their AA role, which they just happen to be really good at doing if they have these dual-purpose heavy AA guns in and adding into the fleet, they seem to be going to be positioned as either the nursemaid cruiser with a carrier, and remember I've talked about this before, how especially in night operations there was the plan that there would be usually two tribals and a cruiser. Well, this is the cruiser you're supposed to normally get sitting with the carrier. So anything tries to sneak up on the carrier, it's going to get a nasty surprise of a lot of firepower heading its way. And if it's bigger than them, well, it's going to get some torpedoes coming at it too. If it's smaller than them, okay. They had two triple 21-inch torpedo tube sets, so they had one either side. So, like British cruisers standard, they had the torpedoes. They had carried ASDIC. They do not carry depth charges. They have ASDIC, so they have a notice if something's trying to torpedo them. And so they can assist as a sort of overwatch vessel, providing extra search capacity if destroyers need it around them. Not so they can go sub-hunting. There is a difference. They have the Type 279 early warning radar. And again, one of the interesting things about this design is rather like the tribal class. They're designed in such a way that fitting radar is remarkably easy when war comes and when they do have radar sets available. The thing that's pointed out with the tribals, and again with these, is there's rather a lot of power conduits, spare power conduits, and spare space for power conduits in them. As if someone had realised they were going to need something which was going to require quite a lot of power quite high up in the ship coming along in the future. It's all a bit of future-proofing. Just a tad of future-proofing. But saying that, it's important to remember, whilst the Dido class are often called AA cruisers, they are screening cruisers in terms of the Royal Navy parlance. And whilst therefore it possibly is arguable, definitely, that Scylla and Charybdis, are closer to AA cruisers with their 4.5-inch gun armament. Again, one of the interesting things is they don't get the full mounts that the battle class destroyers do. Because the battle class get the BD mounts, whereas the mounts on Scylla and Charybdis are, how do I put this? Are put in UD Mark III mountings. That's upper deck Mark III mountings. And that is the mount which is never actually particularly liked. Okay? So they have a theoretically fairly good capability, but there is a reason there aren't many ships built with the UD Mark III. The UD Mark III mount. And there was actually a discussion which was had later on why the battle class got the BD 4.5-inch mount and rather than the UD mount, and literally the answer comes down to Scylla and Charybdis and the experience of operating those UD mounts. It's a mount which can be worked with on a cruiser. It's not a mount which can be worked with on a destroyer, and UD mounts are supposed to be for a destroyer. And it's interesting to note that the Daring class, which eventually are where the 4.5-inch dual purpose, the true purpose, the British have been working on for quite a while by the time it comes out, goes to sea. That's called the UD Mark 6 mount, or sometimes referred to as number 6. So there's the Mark III fitted to these ships. The Mark IV, Mark V never really go to sea. The Mark VI is the next one we see at sea, because there were issues with that upper deck mount. And that's really what held up the 4.5-inch project. But the Didos are cute. They are cute. They are well designed for what the Royal Navy wants them for, which is screening. Well, they're built for not with radar, yes, Malaga, but it's basically a case of radar's not yet available or in service. They are still developing it. But they know it's coming, and it's coming soon. And again, you have to remember, the Royal Navy, when they're ordering them in 1937, the 10-year rule runs out in 1942. So the Royal Navy ordering these in 1937 are getting the ships in place, but they're hoping they have till at least 1942, which means radar's going to be in place, and they want these ships to be quickly able to taken quickly out of service, refit with radar, and put back in service. So that's basically the plan. There's a lot of planning going on in the Royal Navy to make sure they have the strongest fleet they can from 1942 onwards. And a lot of the problems which we see in 1939, 1940 in terms of ship availability, and in 1941, because of ships the state ships are in, is literally because the plan was to have the maximum fleet available from 1942 onwards, and everything in terms of development and structuring was being planned with that in mind. Yeah, there are issues. The British British cruisers do have a habit of trying to ram submarines. At what point was radar leveraged most effectively? Honestly, radar really starts to get really good from 1941 onwards. It started being integrated. You have to remember, the first radar sets are in service by 1938. 1939 is starting to implement them more widely. By 1940, most of these ships are completing with a radar set on them. This is one of the reasons why they're not held up with their construction, because they're being completed mostly with radar sets on them. And that's useful. It was already in the design, but they were there. And it takes time to learn how to use these things. It's like, let's put it this way. Just think about this, you as an individual, okay? Think about when you got your first smartphone. Think how cool it was. But also think how long it took you to learn how to use it to the level of you are able to use it now. Not how long until you're able to use it, because you're pretty much able to use it from get-go, but how long till you're able to use it well, and you know its rhythms, you know its problems, its good points and its bad points. And yeah, that gets easier with each new generation of phone, because you have the experience of operating previous phones, and they're built on a similar policy. But the first one, that takes you a few weeks. And that's not anywhere near like what we're talking about. So just having the technology in service doesn't mean you're necessarily good at it. And what was the problem with the UD mounts? Honestly, it was the space and weight they required. It was also, to an extent, some of the bearings on them. And they worked on a cruiser, but they weren't suitable for destroyers, which is why the battles end up with the BDs. And there's also the construction element in that the BDs are under construction, so it's easier to build the BD, just build more BDs. But the thing is, that's not much of an argument, because the UDs are an easier thing to construct in theory, and should be a lot lighter, and you would theoretically, because of their weight differential and the difference of the hull design, you could have fitted 3 twin turrets onto them, so you could have made the battles into a version of Darings. But yeah. But that's life. Now, the next one we should really consider, is the Atlantas. And please note, I'm going to get into the C's and D's, but we're going to do the Atlantas. The Atlantas are built, as you can see, and the moment you look at these ships, don't turn it the wrong way, from the hull design alone, you can tell one of these fleets are building with the North Sea, North Atlantic in mind. One of these fleets are building with slightly different oceans in mind. Still Atlantic capable. Northern Atlantic and deep Southern Atlantic operating on a regular basis capable. Can operate in the Northern Atlantic. Designed to really do well in the Pacific. That hull design is a differential. But again, I love this Atlanta class because the phrase I often use about these ships, and one of the reasons why they don't last too long after war, is they are destroyer-built cruisers. They are they're taking the smallest cruiser hull you can grab, and they are cramming them with as much weaponry as you can physically get on there. They are destroyer-built cruisers. The Atlantas truly are. They truly, truly are. And again, it comes from the screening idea. It comes from this idea of what they were supposed to be. And again, the Atlanta class don't last long after World War II. Neither design lasts long after World War II. Because they are built for war. And they are built in many ways to, as I've talked about with Vanguard, they are built to make up for the shortfall caused by the treaty system. Because if you'd been building enough cruisers and enough destroyers in the 1930s, because you hadn't had the first London Naval Treaty, you would not be building an Atlanta or a Dido. You wouldn't need to. You'd have enough destroyers, you'd have enough cruisers, you'd have enough screening firepower, you'd have it distributed around the fleet. You wouldn't need these assets. They are there to make up for the shortfall in numbers because you haven't been able to build enough. And whilst you're building up those numbers, these can cover you. Now, the advantages they have, and I would say this, the advantages they have are many. But I would say the biggest advantage they have is they get to start construction. They're laid down in 1940. And they're launched in 1941. September and October 1941 in the case of Atlanta and Juneau. July 1941 in the case of San Diego. You know, they're good ships. They are laid down, though, when war has begun and when some lessons have already been drummed home. If you think about that, Atlanta's laid down at the same point as Norway's going on, and the Americans do have officers watching Norway. And I'm not saying they get a lot of experience crammed into them and a lot of changes crammed into them, but there are adjustments. There are advantages to coming in slightly later. Those adjustments, I would say, are especially felt. And honestly, this is the really big advantage the USN has in terms of how they improve their fire control and how they start working on their fire control. Because the Mark 37, it's a good system. It is a very good system. But it is something which is constantly being refined and worked on, which it should be. And the Americans, again, I never understand people who think this is a stupid idea. If the Americans learn anything from World War One, in World War One, they're sitting watching the war and eventually get dragged into it, and they haven't done anything to modernize or improve their forces basically in that time. They've been watching the war, and they've done virtually nothing which they weren't already planning to do in peacetime with the war going on. Virtually nothing has been funded. In World War II, they don't make that same mistake. They actually start developing things properly. They actually start thinking things through properly. And that's a good thing. That's a really good thing. But you have multiple gunfire control systems. You really do. You have the Mark 33, the Mark 34, and which are both in service. And the 37 starts work on it because there are issues with the 33 in 1936. They start work on that in 1936. And that is the year before the Didos are laid down. Okay? And they keep working on it, and they keep trying to improve it, and they keep trying to make it better. And by the time it's being implemented, it's had a lot of experience built into it, a lot of knowledge. There is the thing is that also the Mark 37 is not the same throughout the war. By 1945, it's worthwhile noting that there had been 92 modifications, major modifications, enough that they changed the digital number of that Type 37 on it. And the fact is, here's another cute thing. In 1941, when December 7th, 1941, there are only 46 Mark 37 directors actually in the fleet. So think about that. There are twice as many modifications done for war as there are units deployed to the fleet in 1941. It's still useful. It's still good. They have lots of systems which are throwing into these assets. They have lots of systems which are building up these capabilities. Now, the other thing I would say about Atlantas, the advantage/disadvantage they have is the 5-inch 38s. Okay? They are designed with 8 dual 5-inch 38s. And that's, again, useful. But it's also problematic in a way. Because one of the problems they have, and I would argue the Atlantas to an extent have, is they have this level of firepower that they are realistically able to provide a sheer vast quantity of firepower to your fleet that you can, especially during the early part of the war, feel almost too confident. You can feel overconfident because you have literally got a spam cruiser with you that will fill the air with lead. And you can go, well, look at that. It's got all these guns. It's got guns everywhere. It's got 3 mounted forward, 3 mounted aft, and 1 on each waist. It's just amazing. Amazing. And it's just not. Because, okay, yes, it has this firepower. It has this capability. But in real terms, it's only 1 ship. And they only have 2 directors per ship, if I remember correctly. I think it's 2 Mark 37s they have per ship. Yeah. 2 Mark 37 directors. So whilst you have a lot of guns, you have directors. You don't necessarily have a lot of targeting capability. But, saying that, it does mean that you have a scenario whereby there should never be less than 6 guns able to engage any target. And with 2 37s, you should always be able to have a Mark 37 able to engage a target. But again, it can give you a full sense of security. Firepower is useful, but it has to be part of the whole fleet approach. And again, this was a problem for the British as well, okay? The example I would give usually is the British doctrine of heavy AA. And as I've said before, it does work to break up the enemy, but it works if it's done in the policy of the aircraft break them up, then the heavy AA, then the light AA. Because the reason that works is because you get broken up by fighters. Your aircraft coming in get broken up by fighters. Their formation gets broken up into pairs. And so they're off in different angles. And suddenly there's a wall of fire in front of you. And you have to maneuver to avoid that. And suddenly, you keep hitting these things. Whereas if you've just got this wall of flak being projected by ships, and you haven't got that burst breaking up by fighters, you just go, I can see that wall's about there. Okay, let's try and angle ourselves to thread it or go over it. You can spot the gaps. If you think about that, it's one of those scenarios whereby you will have a far stronger defense in the whole when you have all the different types of systems assisting you than it will as an individual. Heavy AA on its own is not enough. It needs the other systems there. It needs the other advantages there. And yes, Ralph doesn't help that. The thing is, we keep the VT fuse gets a lot of credit, and it does deserve it. But also, you have to remember the aircraft you're engaging on the VT fuse are usually the ones later in the war. The ones you're dealing with earlier in the war, whilst you don't have the VT fuse, you're still usually pretty good. There are a lot of losses of enemy aircraft to heavy AA in 1939, 1940, 1941, before the VT fuse comes into service. Okay? So, whilst, again, that does make things better, it's not a case of before the VT fuse, heavy AA is pointless and useless and doesn't matter. It's a case of after the VT fuse comes in, instead of you being able to necessarily do the barrage thing and doing the whole, we're going to put up a barrage which is going to be difficult for them to get through and going to take them out that way, you can start targeting aircraft at range. That's the difference. When you have a VT fuse, the big advantage of VT fuse isn't that it suddenly makes you more deadly. It means you can be more targeted in your firing, which means you can be more efficient. You're not expending your ammunition so quickly because you need less per engagement, because you can aim for a kill rather than a block. A block requires you going boom, 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 and covering a whole area. A kill might require you to go boom, 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 get gone. So VT gives you flexibility and gives you the ability to more efficiently engage your targets, which means you can go carry out more engagements and your ammunition lasts longer in the face of enemy threats before you have to withdraw to restock ammunition. But it doesn't suddenly, it's not that before that they were necessarily not still able to do the job of the heavy AA. Targeting beats spray. Yeah, pretty much. In a nice way, spray and pray, you need to spray a lot and pray a lot in order to hit something. Targeting means you can do it more effectively. So I want to be very careful with the VT fuse. People don't go away from this the idea of before the VT fuse it was terrible. After the VT fuse, it was amazing. It's not that scenario. It allows you to operate the system in a different way. For instance, we're going to get onto the actual battle performance. So we're going to get onto second search and all these things as we go through the video. Literally, I have one more slide of the talking about the ships and their conceptions, and then we have the shameless book plug, and then after I've talked through that and caught up with any questions, then we go into the whole wartime analysis, and I'm going to go through theatre by theatre by theatre. No, Ralph, no, don't worry. No, please don't worry. You have to remember, it's not, and I would hope people never think I'm correcting them in sort of in a rude way. It's just I always want to clarify things because I want people to go away with as accurate an impression of the situation as I can manage. So I watch the chat and I try and innovate it because the chat gives me an idea of what you're hearing from what I'm saying. And I'm often worried if I'm not communicating correctly. So I use the chat as a way to go, have I communicated this point properly or have I not? And if I haven't, then I correct myself. I always presume I tend to lean on the assumption it's a failure to communicate on my part properly rather than anything else. Knight, the conception you have here is they're supposed to replace things. They're about growing cruiser numbers in the face of the threat of war and the imminent issues they're going to face. They're not about replacing things, they're about growing things. Okay? Not everything is procured to replace something else. Sometimes it has no clear predecessor it's procured to replace because it's a whole new concept. Sometimes it's being procured to grow the fleet. Sometimes it's being procured because the changing needs of the fleet require you to do something else. Yes, I'm talking about layered air defense system, and that is literally the interesting thing is when people start talking about the layered air defense system, I usually go, "Have you looked at the 1920s and 30s and what the navies were developing at that time?" And they go, "What?" This is why I like Habitual Line Crosser. He talks a great game and does deliver a great game about layered air defense. And it's really fun for me to hear him talking about it because he's literally saying the stuff which I've been saying for years, but I'm talking about 1920s and 30s battle groups and fleets and how they were designed to operate and how they were supposed to operate. And of course, this is the thing is we've been talking about how they're designed and how they're supposed to operate. After Shane's book club, we go into how they do operate and how they reality have to operate because of the situations they find themselves in. Kungan, it's layered defense first. Layers are airplanes. Second is heavy A. Third layer is heavy A, short range. Fourth is medium range. Then this layer is light vengeance. Yeah, pretty much. You want to have the layers, and you have to remember one of the things that people find strange, especially once you consider Top Gun videos and all those movies, etc. The fighters in the 1920s and 30s, their purpose wasn't necessarily to kill the enemy. If they did, that's great. That's a bonus. Their primary purpose in air defense is to break up the attacking air groups. Because if you can break up a strike of 30 aircraft into threes and fours, and then the heavy A breaks up those threes and fours because they suddenly plunge into that after dodging the fighters into ones and twos, and then the medium AA starts to engage and starts to try and pick them off. It demoralizes them, and if they turn back, you win. If they engage badly, you win. And for most ships, one aircraft attacking them at a time, they can dodge it. It's when you've got multiple aircraft attacking from multiple angles at the same time, that's when you're in trouble as a ship. Oh, that would be fun. Lions, that would be a lot of fun. That would be a lot of fun, that discussion. I would enjoy that. I would have to introduce them to Iron Brew. I have a feeling they want to introduce me to Mountain Dew, but I'd want to introduce them to Iron Brew. and just see if they can tolerate it. I'd also, in a nice way, want to see if Buff could tolerate Iron Brew, because I think Buff would enjoy it. New Zealand could use an air defense cruiser today. New Zealand could do a lot of things today. We won't get into the New Zealand Navy. That's a long conversation, which I will probably someday actually be consulting on, but we'll leave that to one side. Oh, the New Zealand Navy. Oh, the New Zealand Navy. They are fun. They really are fun. So, the C-class conversions. Now, I would honestly say these are the only true anti-aircraft cruisers built during World War II. And they're not built their conversions, because they're the only cruisers which actually give up their ability to really have a go at surface targets in theory, in order for there to have an AA ability. i.e. they're the only cruisers which go, look, we don't need to engage surface targets, we need to engage aerial targets. So we're going to have this AA capability. But saying that, and I do mean saying that, there aren't that many of them. And they were second-line cruisers already to begin with. They were second-line cruisers already to begin with by the time we get into World War II. And again, that's not a bad thing. Some of the D-class are also modified, similar to it. You know, Delhi is converted. She has 5-inch 38s in with Mark 37 directors. Delhi is a D-class conversion, but she's later on. She's a cute vessel, though, very cute in terms of capability. But the C-class are the ones which are purposely being started off with the conversions. And again, what's it to do? It's to provide escorts for convoys. It's to provide extra vessels which can keep up with the fleet, because they can still do 29.5 knots. Now, they can still do the requirements they need to do for convoy work, for fleet work in certain scenarios. And their twin 4-inch guns, and they carry a lot of them, are pretty darn useful. They're usually carrying something like 10 4-inch guns. Some of them 8. You know, it depends on when they're modified. Coventry and Curlew are modified in 1936. And they're given 10 single 4-inch guns and 16 pom-poms in two octuple mounts. Curacao, modified in 1939, has 8 4-inch guns in 4 twin mounts and 4 2-pounders. Cairo, Carlisle, and Calcutta, also modified in 38-39, get 8 4-inch guns and 4 pom-poms in one quad mount. And this very much gives the Royal Navy, about 6 AA cruisers. 6 extra AA cruisers. And their role is often escorting convoys. When Philip Vian leaves his convoy, he's escorting up the coast of Africa, to take the Tribal-class destroyers and Piran across the Atlantic to hunt for the Bismarck, he leaves them with a C-class cruiser. He leaves them under the care of a C-class. There were discussions afterwards as to what the C-class would do if they met a submarine threat. And the answer was, well, if it's on the surface, take it out with 4-inch fire. If it's below the surface, ram. But these vessels are not that big. Okay, remember, we're talking cruisers, and they're still called cruisers, but they're cruisers by World War I standards. They are 4,200 tons. But the thing is, they're also capable of doing that. Their hulls are in good enough condition. Their entire bodywork is in good enough condition. They are capable of providing this service. And yes, there is an argument as to when they are going to be replaced. I do know, and I've seen already it's been mentioned in the chat, Norman Freeman writes that the Dido class were to replace them. Well, the thing is, the reason the Dido class weren't to replace them is because they're working on the designs and modifications for them before the Dido class are even laid down. Okay, they're working on it. So they decided they're going to keep them in service. And with their modifications, etc., they are designed to provide the fleet strength into 1942. And they were expected to really serve the Royal Navy until it reached its strength of 1945. So by that grounds, it's theoretically going to be the Crown Colonies which replace them in service. But realistically, it's not going to be the Didos, and it's not going to be anything before the Crown Colonies which replace them in service. When they come into service. You're not going to spend the money on them otherwise. Now, there is a point when you start looking at the early discussions and you start thinking about the ships in terms of treaty terminologies when they're supposed to come over age, that they are supposed to be going out of service, yes, so therefore the class which is being ordered should be replacing them. And yes, if you go and look at the discussions of this class in the early 1930s, that is when they're going to be replaced, and the Didos would fit that timeline. But the reality is, by the time we get to 1936, 1937, the world has changed. The 10-year rule has gone. It officially went in 1932. It actually goes in 1937. I'm going to keep emphasizing that as long as I live. So the world has changed. The Royal Navy is no longer the Royal Navy is no longer being cut to the bone. They're trying to increase. And these hulls are still useful. These ships are still useful. There's some of the ships which can still do 28, 29 knots. You know, they actually take them apart, they modify them, they work on them, and what after, you know, the great thing is with their AA conversions, prior to their conversion, they can do 5,900 nautical miles at 10 knots. After their conversion, they're described as being able to do 3,250 nautical miles at 12 knots. So they can go 20% faster. Okay? And they've lost something of their range in terms of the description they're giving them. They haven't lost that much. And that's because of modifications done to their engines to allow them to maintain the speed and support the other units they're supposed to be doing it. Because most of them were fitted with Brown Curtis and Parsons turbines, and those builders provided turbines for life. Frank Sparta, was it a good idea for the UK to gift the Dido to New Zealand after World War II? Well, they needed a cruiser, and the Dido's the smallest one that was available. No, Freeman doesn't get it wrong. I don't like it when people sort of start writing this about historians getting it wrong. Freeman, and I want to clarify this, I would never say Norman Freeman got anything wrong. I would say Freeman is writing very much the correct phrase for when they are talking about things in the early 1930s. But by the time these ships are actually being laid down, which is when I care about, they're not. They're not replacing them. They're not doing that. There isn't the time or the inclination. They need to maximize fleet strength, and they're aiming on post-1942, and those ships aren't going anywhere till 1945. Okay? They're not. Might have been Batch 2 Didos might have replaced them. If they don't, you know, if the Bologna subclass had been ordered later, they might have been going to replace them. And let's be honest, they are laid down in 1939. They would have been normally completed about 1942. Probably 1942, 43, if it wasn't for, again... See, the thing that annoys me about Churchill's decision to pause carriers and capital ships, he also pauses cruisers. So yeah, if you look at the Bellona class of the Didos, they're laid down November 1939, and they're not launched till September 1942. So you think about that, that is nearly 3 years. Dido, the very first, is laid down in October 1937 and is launched in July 1939. So October 1938 would be a year, and then October is the 10th month of the year, July is the 7th month of the year, so that's an extra 9 months onto that, so 21 months for them to get, 21 months for Dido to go from laying down to launching. For Bellona, she is laid down 30th of November 1939, so pretty much, let's say, December 1939. Let's be nice to them. December 1940, 1 year. December 1941, 2 years. She's completed September 1942. She's 33 months. So 21 months versus 33 months. I.e., the pause in construction adds an extra year on their service entry date. That's really helpful in World War II. So yeah, it's not Freeman got it wrong. It's if Freeman's looking at documents in 1930s and the early 1930s, he is talking quite correctly when he's using his point, when he samples his documents. And then as you go further, you start looking into things and the information starts to change. And the analysis starts to change. So I don't want... This is the point you often have to think. Historians will look at the documents in front of them, and especially in the context of what they're saying in the book, and I cannot remember exactly what it says in the book, but when he's talking about the book, he's making perfect sense for the time period he is pointing to. Once you're talking about it later and you're doing the analysis, why would Henderson be planning, working on the plans to upgrade these to AA cruisers in 1935, 36, and implementing it in 37, implementing it, as I've said, in, well, 1936, 1938 and 1939, when he's building new ships which are due to enter service in 1941 to replace them. You don't spend all the money, all the time, all the effort when you are building up, preparing for war, on doing this kind of conversion on this hull, if you are planning to get rid of them before you suspect, well, before the date you're planning war is coming. You just don't do that. But the world changes, so plans change. The plan in 1935 is different than the plan in 1936, is different than the plan in 1937, when the Second London Naval Treaty has completely failed, is different than the plan in 1938 and 1939. Okay? And also, you have to remember, having these as second-line units makes sense in a war versus Japan. Especially when you consider the amount of convoys which are going to be entering areas which might need air defense, but wouldn't need a full fleet with them. And wouldn't necessarily, well, they might be individual attacking aircraft rather than a whole strike. So yeah, having an AA cruiser provides you a lot of firepower to protect your merchant ships. It's different scenarios. So now we're at the Shames book plug. Yay! Where I get to say thank you to you all, and I get to say we're at slide 7 of 15, so we're about the halfway mark. And I get to say thank you to everyone for supporting the channels on YouTube and on Twitch. Hello to everyone. I always like seeing all the chatting away. Brew Ships will be on Sunday. That'll be on its normal time. This didn't come out on Thursday because I was doing the VE stuff for Armchair Admirals. I hope you enjoyed that episode. I know me, Drac, and Fleet did. We had a lot of fun with that one. it's fun. I'm hoping they do a VJ Day one, and we can do all the stuff about the war against Japan, all the issues which came up there, because I'd really like to do some discussions on that. And it's fun, and there's a few other things coming back soon, and there's stuff which we're going to be announcing soon, and there's all sorts of videos I need to do. I'm behind on several videos, but I'm hoping to get ahead of them again, and I'm hoping to use next few months to get really far ahead. And yeah, there's a lot of interesting stuff coming up. The one thing I do have to announce, I'm going to keep announcing this, is that next week is going to be a bit of a World War I focus, because Jellicoe, which was supposed to be on Tuesday, I've saved till next Tuesday. And Sheer is going up on Wednesday. So you're going to have Jellicoe and Sheer come out in the same week. They're going to be Tuesday and Wednesday evening videos. And I hope you're going to enjoy that. And yeah, I hope you're going to have fun. I'd also wanted to talk about, I found in my box of books this. Star Captains. Frigate Captains in Napoleonic War by Tom Wareham. And honestly, I'd forgotten how good it was. I really had forgotten how good it was. One of the things I really like about it is it has all these tables in here, which give you all sorts of interesting information. Their average length of service, what they're doing, what they're up to, various paintings, of course. But it is a really cool book. It's an older book, but if you can find a copy, it's worth it. I think... Well, I can tell how much I bought this for. I bought this book for a copy of this book for £8. But that's in pencil, and that's from ages ago. So goodness knows how much it's now. But it might be about the same price. And Perthnax will come soon. But yeah, it's a good time. And, you know, thank you again for supporting the channel. Thank you for liking, sharing, subscribing, doing all the things, and all the people who are members. This year's target for membership is to get to 20,000 subscribers. And, the other thing which I'm going to start doing now is I'm going to start talking about November plans, because November, I normally launch the Christmas video season where I put a video out every single day with something special. And last year I did a 36-hour live stream. This year I'm planning to do 5 12-hour live streams. So the Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Thursday, Friday. And then do another 36-hour live stream on the Saturday and Sunday. So I'll have done 96 hours. So I'm doing an early book VLS cells number of hours streaming. And the idea is the first 5 are each going to be for charity. All the money that comes in from each of those streams is going to go to a charity. And I'm going to tell you which one. It's going to be 5 different naval charities, or naval inclined charities. One of them is probably going to be Combat Stress, because I've worked with them many times in the past, so I know how good a work they do. And I know how many friends of mine they've helped. Next year I might include some animal charities, but this year is going to be naval charities. And then the 36-hour one, I am going to be selfish. That's going to be entirely about fundraising for me and for the channel to help grow the channel for the following year. So basically that's going to be it. And that's coming up in November. And I know I'm announcing that a long way in advance, because it's only May. But I want you all to be prepared for that when it comes out in 6 months' time. There is going to be 96 hours of live streaming. And that means it's going to be a 3-hour presentation every night. There's going to be basically 6 hours of Q&A. And there's going to be 3 hours of probably playing a computer game with some people who want to take part in it. And I will change the game, but I will probably, depending especially on the charities involved, I'll be very selective over what games are used. For example, on the Combat Stress night, I probably won't do Space Marine 2. Okay? I don't think those two particularly go together. And my gameplay in one, I have to remember I'm not supposed to swear. So yes. Right then. Hello, there is... For some reason, there is no name by one of the cool questions. I have no idea. But it's one of the questions from YouTube. But there's no name coming in. As in, would a leader go aboard one leader mission as opposed to they're an escort? Walter Brown, Destroyer Leader is the only ship only one I can think up. destroyer leader. Destroyer leader basically means it's supposed to keep up the destroyers and actually have the staff or the captain of the flotilla who's coordinating destroyers to be aboard them. But it's different depending on the fleet structure. The Royal Navy destroyer leader tends to be another destroyer, and they're in charge of their flotilla. And then you might have a rear admiral destroyers who might be on a light cruiser, might be on a tribal, depending on which rear admiral it is and what they feel like it. In the US Navy, because they tend to run larger flotillas, and each one's made up of destroyer squadrons. Okay, so then they will have a flotilla leader who's on a cruiser, but he would actually be probably equivalent with, because he'd probably actually fit in closer to the rear admiral destroyers in the Royal Navy. It's a different approach to it, but that's one of the reasons why the US Navy tends to do the destroyer leaders like the Japanese do from light cruisers, whereas the Royal Navy's destroyer leaders tend to be other destroyers. Oh, yeah. Basically, if you're going to use the Atlantas for scouting, you've got an issue. They're theoretically for scouting, but no one actually wants to use them for scouting. That's more of a Brooklyn class, a true light cruiser function. So the date time. The date time is sort of decided in my head, but I haven't announced it yet because I want to announce the various things we're going to be doing in the second half of the year. Later on, probably June, to sort of explain it all what's coming. I also want to have confirmed the stuff I'm doing in October, so that I have it worked out, because basically normally the plan is I do that big thing and then I have the week that then I go into all the videos for Christmas and the Christmas series, when I have a video try to have a video coming out every single day as part of my work to, well, I wouldn't say work, part of my efforts every year, because as you all know, every year I try and make sure I have a video coming out every day over Christmas period, because of people who get, how to put this, the number one time of year where people get lonely is Christmas. And the example often used is a guy called Jimmy Carr, who talked about how people watching a lady came up to him and she'd made the decision to commit suicide. And she waited till after her family got to sleep. She decided to wait a bit by watching his videos until she got to the time. And she kept watching his videos and kept watching another one all night. And then by the time it was morning, she'd watched all his videos and she hadn't done it. And so she was still alive because of him. And a few years ago, when I started doing the YouTube stuff, I was talking to some friends who were also involved in YouTube but had other things. And we had friends who had, let's say, not survived the Christmas period. And we all were listening to this Jimmy Carr story. And so we decided that whenever it's Christmas, we will make sure there is a video going out every single day on YouTube from each of our channels. We don't talk about it. We're not an organized group. It's just something we do, or try and do, so that people have something new to look forward to. And if they are all alone, if it doesn't help anyone, we tried. If it helps one person, it's worth it. And so that's why every year over Christmas period, for roughly about 84-ish days, so about 12 weeks, I make sure there's a video, try and do a video every single day. And I like to do it in a nice way. If I'm at full strength, I like it for there to be 3 videos a day: a comment response video, a short, and another video, and a new video topic every single day. But that's if I'm at full tilt. Last year I couldn't manage 3 videos a day. I wasn't back. Still was nowhere near. I got the energy back from the pneumonia, but I still try to do a video every single day. And yeah, as said, I will try and start it off with 96 hours this year. Anyway, let's get back to this. let's talk about one of the first interesting areas. Now, the only picture you have for the Bay of Biscay is this battle. And this is the battle I've talked about when I talked about HMS Enterprise. Yeah, HMS Enterprise, not USS Enterprise. HMS Enterprise, oh goody! The Germans have sent out destroyers and Schnellboats for me ship. Oh good! Oh, how many guns do I have? How many targets do I have? I will service them all, cruiser. Now, the thing is about the Bay of Biscay is if you look at it on a map, you realise that's actually going to be a pretty critical area of operations because a lot of the German Atlantic search aircraft go out over there, a lot of patrol aircraft go out of there, a lot of the German submarines go out through the Bay of Biscay to go to the Atlantic. All these things and all the British convoys which are going to the Mediterranean, which are going to Africa, which are going to South America, will cross in front of the Bay of Biscay. It's one of the really weird parts of naval history that whenever I bring it up, most people look at me as if I'm confused and go, but what happened there? But honestly, a lot. In fact, more often than not, this is the bay where British cruisers especially get their first actions when they've come into service. If they are heading to the Mediterranean fleet, and Lord knows the poor Didos head straight out to the Mediterranean fleet quite quickly because that's where they need them. And they really do need them. You know, poor Bonaventure and so many of the others do go pretty much straight out to the Mediterranean fleet, straight out to operations over there, down there, and assisting with those operations. Admittedly, Bonaventure Nade, I think, start off with doing some operations in the Faroe Islands and trying to work up and trying to do all sorts of other duties. But very quickly, they find themselves off going to convoys to Egypt and convoys to the Mediterranean fleet and sorting out operations over there. But most of these ships, their first experience of coming in a concerted land-based air attack is in the Bay of Biscay. Schnellboats do sink things bigger than destroyers. But honestly, and you know, how do I put this? They do get a lot of things bigger. I haven't got a list of them actually. I think they sank HMS Manchester. Technically, we're gonna give them the credit for that kill. Which was a town class. I think they did quite a few. They did a few other sort of interesting operations throughout World War II. They, of course, were the vessels which caused the trouble for the exercise Tiger. They had they decided to try and attack Overlord, but they had a nasty run-in with some very, very interesting vessels, which basically might have been Didos and might have gone, hello, we have a lot of firepower. But saying that, they are a constant threat. They are something you constantly need to guard against. Again, this is the thing is, attrition sometimes is on a strategic scale. Okay? So a Schnellboat doesn't cost much to produce. But my ships having to be on guard the whole way through the Bay of Biscay because of surface threat attack from a Schnellboot attack, that wears on my crews. That's extra time at alert stations. That's extra time with those crews having to focus on manning their stations rather than maybe taking part in gunnery practice, maybe running other drills, performing other maintenance. All this wears on them. So the Bay of Biscay is a really interesting space. This is also the space where the escort carrier Dido hybrid operation starts to really work out. Because one of the things about Didos, again, I said they were built with the idea of potentially, and the same with Atlantas, they were built with the idea of being flotilla leaders, of looking after being the space for rear admiral destroyers to sit. So they have some actual command facilities. It's not much. There's actually a debate and a note from Philip Vian, well, which is attributed to Philip Vian but never said, which is when he was offered, because he kept complaining about running the fleet from a carrier, because the carriers he was given didn't have flag space, and said he needed a flagship to actually have the space to operate command properly and not cause disruptions to the crew, to the carrier crew. They offered him apparently a Dido, and his response was apparently, I'd have more space on a tribal. But they're there. They are there. But again, and I would point this out, Didos are built for a very different version of a surface action than Atlanta. There are people already discussing the surface action realities of the two. The Atlanta is a flotilla leader, destroyer leader. That is the emphasis on her role. And screening is the secondary. The Dido is a screening cruiser. She's screening against all threats. That can include light cruisers. But also think about it, who the British are thinking about when they're designing the ships. They're ideally thinking about the Italians and the Japanese. So that explains why the British are going for the 5.25-inch gun rather than going the 4.7. Which is their closest, at that time, equivalent to the 5. Because they had the 4.5 in development. So, you know, that's the differential. That's the reasoning for the difference. It's who you're going to fight. And what you're going to fight with. Makes a difference in your design choices and your design analysis. The Mediterranean is the next big theatre. Okay? Now, I know I haven't got into start discussing the Atlantas here yet, but let's be honest, I'm working my way through the theatres of the war and the lessons of the heavy cruisers in the AA role, and I'm sorry, but the Atlantas don't get to play much until you get to 1942 onwards. So 1939, 1940, 1941, I'm pretty much limited to talking about Didos and C-Class. And you should note that the C-Class especially have a lot of fun in the Bay of Biscay. A lot of convoys are escorted through the Bay of Biscay by C-Class cruisers, and they do a lot of blasting away here. So, the Mediterranean. Now, the interesting thing in the Mediterranean is this is where the British can both get closest to their pre-war doctrine in terms of operations, and also keep having to consistently improvise the most. Now, what am I saying about that? Well, if we consider Matapan is the only battle in history, literally the only battle in history, which has gone as outlined in doctrine pre-war. That's how rare it is a battle goes according to pre-war doctrine, okay? There is literally one in history. I'm a naval historian. I spent my life studying this. If you can disprove me, I'll be very happy to hear it, because it'll give me another example to give. But as far as I know, the only naval battle in history which has gone exactly according to pre-war doctrine is Matapan. Strike with aircraft at range. Disable enemy ship. Close at night. Annihilate in detail. That is literally British pre-war doctrine. That is pre-war doctrine. Now, the thing is, if we consider these operations, though, in the Mediterranean, you do have the battles of Sirte, you do have the losses of Didos in the Mediterranean and to various other scenarios. Mostly they get torpedoed by submarines. That's actually pretty much... yeah, I'm looking at... The leading killers of Didos are submarines. Not a single one of them is lost to air attack. They are all lost to submarine... Hang on, no. Actually, there is one. I told a lie. There is one... There's Spartan, right at the bottom of my list. Lost to air attack in 1944. I'm saying this, and I don't think I'm right, but hang on, scroll down. Yeah, one lot. She was lost to air attack. She was covering a force, and she was lost. Oh, she was lost in Anzio. She was lost in covering Operation Shingle. And the other operations going along that, she was lost to a glide bomb attack. She deployed smoke and firepower to cover the other ships, but she was herself not covered. But Heinschel HS-293 hit Spartan just after the funnel and managed to detonate in the upper compartments, blowing a hole in the upper deck, which flooded. Ouch! That's painful. That's also a cool shot, but that's painful. That's gonna... No wonder that led to quite a lot of her personnel being killed and wounded. She lost 5 officers and 41 ratings were killed or missing, presumed dead, and 42 wounded. And no surprise with that bomb hit, but that is also a very, very lucky bomb hit. A very lucky one. But, broadly speaking, these are fighting in some of the most dense and dangerous air attacks of World War II. I cannot emphasize this. The operations of Crete, the convoy supply runs to Malta, these cruisers are going into them, and they are a key part of providing that layered air defense. You have the fighters on the outside, and when you don't have the fighters available, when, like at the Battle of Sirte, you don't have a carrier with your force, and it's worthwhile considering that, because the first and second battles of Sirte are quite famous for being all-cruiser and destroyer factions in terms of the British forces. Although, I would like to point out that when we list it, we only list HMS Carlisle as an AA cruiser. In terms of the Royal Navy time, they only list Carlisle as a AA cruiser. They have Dido and Penelope, of course, is an Arethusa class. They are cruisers. Cleopatra is a Dido class, and so is Euryalus. So there are 3 Didos there, and there's Penelope. Penelope's the only one with 6-inch guns. Penelope is the only one with 6-inch guns. All the rest are 5.25s. That's also the battle where HMS Seek does her... Ooh, there's an enemy battleship. I wonder what I can do to her. I'll throw baked beans at her, a scenario. It works. Then wrong, she was sort of in action because she was laying smoke and fire to protect the rest of the fleet. So she was covering the rest of the fleet. So she was actually successful, sort of underway, but she was protecting an amphibious force. So she's not able really to maneuver. And the Ranger Marina is actually pretty good, Devon Wrong. They really are pretty good. There are issues with the Strategic High Command, but the Italian Navy is pretty good. And the Italian Army, I would say, gets a bad reputation because a lot of Germans spent a lot of time post-World War II trashing it. But you look at the North Africa campaign, you look at the realities of it, the Italian army was often a pretty hard fighter to fight off against. There's also the complicated scenario that the Italians don't usually really want to defend their service in World War II. They try and move past it. So, whereas there are plenty of people to denigrate it to promote themselves, and post-war, when the Germans are trying to sell themselves as useful allies against the Soviets, they are really stretching and stressing their martial prowess and their capabilities. Whereas the Italians don't need to because they switch sides during the war. No one was prepared really for glide bombs. No one was prepared. The thing is, lots of nations were developing them, but they weren't yet prepared for them. And really, the only defense you have against glide bombs is you have to have your fighters up at that point because it's before surface-to-air missiles come in. It's after, honestly, the rocket system, theoretically, if they managed to actually get that working, could have theoretically provided with something of a capability against aircraft in that role, but realistically, you need your fighters up to break them up and stop them being able to do an engagement and guide those missiles, those bombs in from range, and that's what you have the fighters for. Anyway, so the Second Battle of Sirte, which is, by the way, where this picture is from, you can see Cleopatra making smoke. You can see Euryalus moving into action. She's this one. You can see what they're doing. You can see how their approach. And they're starting to fire and they're trying to engage their opponents. But the Second Battle of Sirte is... we tend to call it inconclusive or an argumentative, but honestly... while the British succeed in driving off the Italians succeed in blocking the convoy. So it's a strategic loss for the British. I would argue it's a tactical win for the British because, let's be honest, a force of destroyers and cruisers, 4 light cruisers, an old C-class conversion to an AA cruiser, and 18 destroyers, roughly, including some Hunts, which were escort destroyers, managed to drive off a force which is made up of a full-on battleship, 2 heavy cruisers, light cruiser, 10 destroyers, and all sorts of other assets, when they are not protecting a convoy. And that battleship is the Littorio. It is the Littorio. But, it's kind of like the First Battle of Sirte, where the Italians are turning up with the Giulio covering a convoy, the Andrea Doria, the Giulio Cesare, and the Littorio covering, providing distant cover. The First Battle of Sirte is 2 convoys going at each other and literally bashing into each other. And the British have 5 cruisers and 5 light cruisers and 14 destroyers. And they find themselves fighting a battle versus 4 battleships, 2 heavy cruisers, 3 light cruisers, and 13 destroyers. And again, I would argue that as, realistically, a Regia Marina victory. Because the British don't achieve what they want to achieve. And the British have destroyers damaged. But the thing is, Again, you're looking at it, it's a rather similar thing. And again, one of the cruisers, again, is Carlisle in the first Battle of Surt. It's Philip Vian again, aboard Naid, a Dido class. Eurelis, a Dido class. That's his convoy escort force is literally three light crew, two Didos and Carlisle, a converted C class with 8 destroyers backing him up. And then he has Aurora and Penelope, Lance and Lively, which is 2 Force K to call on, which is 2 Arethusa class and 2 L class destroyers. They had the 4th destroyer flotilla involved in Force B, which is HMS Sikh, Mary, Legion, and of course the Isaac Spheres. There's also HMS Neptune wandering around, which is a Leander class. And it's when you start looking and going, well, technically, here's the thing, the largest cruiser, largest, most powerful vessel the British fleet has there, which is, by the way, a fleet made up of Royal Navy ships, Dutch ships, Australian and New Zealand ships, because they are there, is a Leander class. And to me, that shows how stretched the British were. But again, the Didos equipped themselves well. Are they providing much in the air role? They are. When they come under air attack, they are engaging. They are providing the heavy role. It's actually, in terms of how to put it, Vian was trying to avoid combat. Their aircraft come in to attack the fleet. He has to fire at the aircraft using his guns, and that reveals the British position, which allows the Italians to spot them. And if it was only because of the lack of radar, which of course the Germans hadn't supplied them with, that the Italians tried to avoid, well, actually, quite honestly, he wants to avoid a night engagement. He knows the British have radar. He doesn't have enough radar. But again, they're involved in these operations. Crete is another example of the Didos getting heavily involved in operations in terms of air defense. And yeah, it was not exactly an easy scenario for the British, but they were covering the evacuation. And they used every single ship they had available to do it. And a lot of them were employed. But it's understandable when the Formidable's out and she's operating with Warspite and Barham, guess what's escorting her? HMS Ajax, HMS Orion, HMS Perth, and HMS Dido. Why do they have the heavy AA cruiser with them? Well, the screening cruiser, which can provide heavy AA, because they don't have enough destroyers. But still, between the 15th and 27th of May, the Royal Navy's AA guns claims were 20 aircraft shot down for certain, and 11 probables, and 15 more damaged. Now, to be honest, that fits pretty darn well with the rough list of aircraft lost by the Germans and Italians in the air attacks. So that's a pretty good ratio going on there. But of course, the problem that our Royal Navy has in terms of their operating there is they're operating at the other end of the supply line from Britain, which is going through the Battle of Britain and various other things at the time, which means spare parts of Merlin engines are at a premium, and getting them for their full miles is not that easy. So poor Formidable, as useful as she ain't got enough operating fighters to be the outer circuit. So that means puts more pressure on the heavy AA providing the outer circuit. And if you only have Dido there, you start to realise why HMS Nubian was playing close escort to Formidable, and why Nubian gets her stern blown off defending Formidable. Literally, Nubian doesn't sink, by the way. She gets hit. She loses her stern. A section of stern up until about, I think it's to Y mount. It's pretty much is lost. And she steers her way home using her shafts, so using her propellers. She loses her entire rudder, her entire rear stern section. She steers her way home with her shafts to, basically by going, okay, more revolutions port engine, more revolutions starboard to turn herself that way and get herself home. Royal Navy, Tribal class destroyers, always losing bits of them, always losing their extremities. But overall, their performance during the war was pretty useful and pretty capable in the Mediterranean. And again, it's understandable. Having these assets there was useful. And it's not just the Didos which saw service in the Mediterranean. And I'm trying to look up for my picture on it, because I haven't put it in here, but I'm now cross-examining myself and debating whether I should have put it in there. Because I'm sure I have a picture of... It was from roughly then. Oh, let's just do it that way. Let's search my notes that way. This is the trouble. When you have too many pictures and you think, oh, that would be good, but that would be good. No, I'll put that in. I'll put that in. You debate it in your head and you go, oh, what shall I do? And eventually you do it and you go, did I do it right? I don't know if I did. Don't know if I did. I thought it was in my torch notes because I thought there was one with torch. But it might not have been. It might have been entirely Brooklyn class. I think they were. It was entirely Brooklyns with torch. Yeah. I thought it was Atlanta in their notes. Sorry, I'm misremembering it. I'm sure there was a Atlanta with torch, but obviously there isn't. Anyway, let me get to the Indian Ocean. Now, in the Indian Ocean, believe it or not, the Didos do get some action, but mostly they get action as being a flagship. Mostly they get operations as being a flagship. Mostly they get to do their service out there leading task forces of escort carriers. Because here's the thing, a cruiser hull, especially one which was designed even as a leader to have the ability of being a destroyer leader, has the ability to be used as a flagship for vessels which don't have good command facilities. And if you think about World War II, when they started to use escort carriers as strike carriers, and that's where the origin of that phrase is, because it was an escort carrier if it's got one type of air group on that element, it's a strike carrier if it's got another type of air group. And by the way, that is where the whole phrase tailored air group comes from. For anyone who's thinking tailored air group is something new, it's not. It's World War II. It's the escort carriers, or rather the Woolworths carriers they're originally called. And yes, they could be tailored to the operations as required. They could be. And with that in mind, with that focused on, well, they don't tend to have the command and control facilities you need for operations. So what are you going to do with them? What do you do with them? Well, you send a cruiser with them. and you preferably want to send something which can assist them in their operations. And a cruiser like this, which has a general purpose but quite dual purpose armament, is pretty darn useful, because it can do things like engage aircraft, coordinate, and engage in actions. And that is something which facilitates those escort carriers being able to operate far and above what they did historically. So this is the equivalent of if you had Taffy 3 orientated in Royal Navy terms, they would have had with them a light cruiser, because it would have been their command flagship. Quite often with Royal Navy, if you look at the strike carrier, when they're organizing the escort carriers, when they're going out on strikes, they will have a Dido with them as their flagship and command ship, which gives you a whole different idea on it. The Americans don't tend to bother with that. They tend to have other ways of getting around that situation, and other scenarios of getting around it, including putting the work and a lot of staff work onto other staffs on other ships in other formations. So both navies have a slightly different approach to it. It's one of the interesting things. Both are trying to use escort carriers to fill in and provide for the second role operations you need aviation ships for, but you don't have enough fleet carriers to go around. But how they approach managing them is different. And in this area, you'll see HMS Royalist really getting used a lot. So if you're ever bored and you want to track the war in Indian Ocean and see how well it's going, look up HMS Royalist and look up her war service and look up where she's going. She's not one of the well-remembered vessels. She really isn't. She's sort of ends up with the Royal New Zealand Navy eventually in 1956 and serves them for a good few years. But she is a very useful vessel for that. She does service in the Mediterranean as a leader of these vessels. And remember, in the Mediterranean, the Royal Navy tried the idea of having HMS Unicorn act as their flagship. They found out HMS Unicorn wasn't that good. Vienne wasn't very happy aboard her because she didn't have a lot of space for being a flagship. And so that's one of the reasons why the Royal Navy goes to, okay, we'll use a Dido. It works. It was more a case of HMS Royalist was usually there with about 4 to 6 escort carriers. And not really there as an AA cruiser role, there as their flagship. She was really the flagship. She was the flagship for Task Force 88 in 1944, Operation Dragoon. She was supporting she's the flagship of what's called the 21st Aircraft Carrier Squadron, supporting the Rangoon landings. And it's quite interesting. When you look up the 21st Carrier Squadron, you'll notice the first thing in it that we sort of sitting there going is, oh, they've got a Dido class Royalist, and then later on they have 2 Didos. And they usually have between 4 and 6 escort carriers. They usually have some destroyers. And it's quite interesting to note that when HMS Nubian is reassigned, that's when they assign HMS Phoebe. So basically, you can have 2 Didos, or you can have a Dido and a Tribal. You can't have 2 Didos and a Tribal, because that's 2 command ships. And yeah, because again, and why do I say this? Because in Operation Carson, they've lost HMS Phoebe and they now have gained HMS Tartar. Tribal class destroyer has joined them. It's just, it's the way it goes. The Royal Navy knows what it knows what it has these ships for. It knows what they're doing, and they're there to do it. But they are considered heavy AA cruisers by most of us when we're looking back. But what they're treated as their point is screening cruisers, light force command cruisers, and light force supporting cruisers. They are for screening operations. That's screening against air attack, but also surface attack. And I also thought I'd bring up D-Day. I thought I'd bring up Black Prince because I've talked about certain battles before. I often talk about what 10th Destroyer Flotilla gets up to in World War II and D-Day and defending D-Day. Well, HMS Black Prince was their fire support. She's supposed to be backing them up in the fight. She honestly doesn't get to do more than actually fire Star Shell for most of the fight, but she's there. And again, she's there for screening duties. As are most of the cruisers like her doing. They are there for screening duties. They are there to make sure the enemy are screened off, whether they are surface threats or air threats. They are screened from getting to the main forces. This is what screening forces means. Today we call them, we usually just lump in as just called all escorts. But at those points you had pickets, you had screening, you had close. You had all these different phrases and gradations of escort because that is how you fought. That is how you operated. That is how you conducted operations. That's what she's there for. And again, an interesting career to look up. But I haven't got to talk much about the Pacific. I haven't got much to talk about. I haven't got to talk much about the Pacific yet. And that's because, honestly, the Americans have these ships, but they don't really use them that well. If we start to consider the Atlantas, the Tucson doesn't commission till February 1945. The Flint commissions in August 1944, and I realise they are the Oakland subclass, but to say they're not really getting much attention in construction is an understatement. You know, you can see the reasoning with the Alaskas versus the Iowas. Which would I prefer to put the resources in? An Iowa. It's about the same amount of resources in so many respects. An Iowa gets me more bang for my buck and is more useful overall. I have enough 8-inch cruisers, and if I have the Iowas, then the Alaska sits in between. And realistically, by the time it's being built, I don't no longer need it so much. If I'd built it in 1937, that shit would have been useful. I mean, seriously, the Alaskas would have been running the war. They would be so well known. I mean, every time a carrier battle group went off, surging off somewhere, and Alaska would be leading its escort force, and that would be the ship those carriers would depend on to protect them. That would be the ship that would be holding the line if they found themselves afoul of a Congo. That would be the ship leading the cruisers. But by the time it comes in, it's far too late, and it's just not needed. There's just enough of everything else in super large numbers that they don't need it. So it's just a case of, it's lost it. And by the way, that's what probably does for my the strike cruiser, which I've always wanted to see entered into service because it would have been so sweet, but no. So thank you, whoever slow funded the Alaskas, because you ruined my chance of getting strike cruisers in to the US Navy. And I wanted the strike cruisers. They'd have been useful. But leaving that to one side. The Atlantas are so slow-walked that honestly you would think the US Navy had suffered from the same pause in construction that the Royal Navy did. And as far as I know, Winston Churchill didn't manage to get them to pause construction as well. They didn't. The fact is, you know, you have Atlanta, Juneau, San Diego, and San Juan. And Atlanta and Juneau are both sunk during the Battle of Guadalcanal. They're both sunk on the 13th of November 1942. Both sunk in the naval battle of Guadalcanal. Then you have San Diego and San Juan. They're commissioned in 1942, in January and February 1942. So they are, well, one of them is commissioned before the other one, before the others are lost. Well, they're both commissioned before the others are lost, but it's a case of they don't really get the service they need. And thank you, Brent Monkhouse. Thank you for all the memberships. Thank you. You know, they have this. They have this opportunity. They are commissioned, but you have two of them. You have two. The next one isn't commissioned, Oakland, till July 1943. Reno comes in December 1943. And then, I said, it's August 1944 for Flint and February 1945 for Tucson. And what I really think is quite disturbing is think about this from the perspective of the invasion of Japan. These are ships you'd want for the invasion of Japan. They're literally spam AA ships. Literally spam AA ships. And yet they don't buy them. And the reason they're not buying them is because of the huge amount of destroyers they're building. And this is the problem for them. They are good ships. For AA, they bring a lot of firepower. But for the cost of one of those, I can build about, well, for any two of these, I can probably build about 4 or 5 destroyers once you get into the economies of scale. Thank you, Kungan. Oh, there's lots of memberships coming in. Thank you. And that's their problem. It's one of the interesting things. In many ways, by going for the 5.25, it was just enough firepower that the Didos are justified as a cruiser. By going for the 5-inch 38, the Atlantas get probably the better overall for what they needed to do in terms of the Pacific Performance AA weapon. But that means they're in direct competition with the destroyer build. Direct competition of the destroyer build. And yeah. That's a problem. That's the problem for them. They are too much large destroyers. As good as they are. And look at these designs. By the way, that is some of the prettiest painting you will see in World War II. The camo schemes of, in this case, this is a Juno. It's just, yeah. She's just gorgeous. This girl just doesn't stop having pretty photos of her and doesn't stop having pretty paint schemes. And she has a very proud crew. Especially like this one, which is designed to make it you're not sure whether you're taking on a destroyer, what size ship is, how big it is, how fast it's going because of the wavy lines, everything. I really like that. But yeah. She has a really bad time. They both have really bad luck. And the interesting thing is, of course, among those lost aboard when the Juno is sunk is the 5 Sullivan brothers. Joseph, Francis, Albert, Madison, and George Sullivan. And that's, of course, where the USS the Sullivans, the destroyer which I went on a few years ago with Drac when we were in Canada, when we visited Canada, America, is named for. But again, a gorgeous ship, and she's not lost to air attack, she's lost to a submarine. And that's a big problem for the US. Because these ships would have been very useful if you can think about it in terms of when they are lost and when some of the battles take place. Because when we're talking about American operations in terms of the Battle of Midway, we're talking about their fleet formations and their fleet utility. And we're talking later on about Battle of Philippine Sea and all these operations. Having vessels like the Atlantas in large numbers would have been very useful. But, on the balance of things, it's easier to produce a larger number of destroyers. And so that's what they do. They produce a larger number of destroyers. And it's also worthwhile noting that at the Battle of Midway, yeah, I think the Atlanta's there, but is the Juno? I'm trying to remember. Is the Juno there? I should probably look it up. No, I think it's just Atlanta. I think only Atlanta is there. But she's useful. She is useful. She's with Thomas Kincaid's cruiser group. And she is there, providing a lot of firepower, supporting the Enterprise and Hornet. But again, these vessels are lost to torpedoes. There were two Junos. One of the differences, one difference was the 5-inch mounts. The second one didn't get the wing mounts. Yes, this is the first Juno I was talking about. No, I only got listed as one Juno. I think, in terms of USS Junos, there was a Juno class light cruiser commissioned in 1946, but that's not another Atlanta class. There's only one Juno class Atlanta class. I was confused for a second there because you said there were two Junos. I'm going, hang on. No, but the Juno class, which is produced in the Juno class cruisers, which are modified Atlanta class design, but they are very much how do I put this? They are very much an end-of-war commissioning vessel. The Juno Spokane of Fresno. They're laid down in September 1944, and they're not commissioned until 1946. So, yeah, they're not really included in my analysis here. And yeah, right, they don't have wing turrets, but there's also other differences between them and the Atlantas. So, bottom turret picture is missing. No, the bottom picture isn't missing the wing turrets. You just have to look very, very carefully at it. The wing turrets are there. The wing turrets are there. If you want to go look up, the picture is available on Wikipedia for you to go and look it up if you want to look. Because, as always, and as I always say, I use Wikipedia pictures because if they're on Wikipedia, they are in common, so no one can be. So I've used pictures I already own the rights to and I'm able to freely use, or ones which are on Wikipedia and therefore in commons, and therefore they are definitely allowed for public use. This one is definitely Juno and has got the wing turrets. It's just you've missed their camouflage. You see them now. Thank you, Tom Purry 23. They are well camouflaged, aren't they? Don't worry. The fact you didn't see them tells me the camouflage was working as it was supposed to, which is a kind of a good thing. You know, it shows it worked. But honestly, they just don't get enough. They don't get enough use. Whereas the Didos get a lot of active use. Honestly, the Atlantas just aren't available enough numbers to be used properly. And they aren't able to be used as the command ships, which they could have been. They could have been good command ships. You have to remember, these ships were built with the idea of being destroyer leaders. They do have space aboard to act as flagships for smaller groups. I would have said to myself that would have been a perfect use for them. And if we consider the scenario of Taffy 3, which I'm going to bring up because people keep talking about it, and it's worthwhile considering. Now, I'm not saying Taffy 3 would have been different if there had been a cruiser there as a flagship, but it would have been a different scenario for those destroyers and for the whole force if there had been a cruiser there as a flagship. Even Atlanta class, because that's going to have a very different communications set, a very different communications capability, and those destroyers and destroyer escorts, if they launch themselves into attack, are suddenly going to have the firepower of one of these behind them. And whilst it's probably going to attract most of the enemy attention, it's going to attract most of the enemy attention. And that actually helps your destroyers get closer. Now, that might sound like a terrible juxtaposition, but if you're in the point of, and this is if it comes out of British doctrine more than American doctrine, but the scenario was always is if you do your best thing to get the destroyers in close to their torpedoes so they can get a kill. And you do that by using firepower to try and suppress the enemy trying to kill them. You do that by making yourself more focused on them. So that's what the tribal class destroyers, which are literally the tip of the spear, literally go into training knowing that their priorities are to fire at the enemy to try and suppress them, but also make themselves more visible targets so the enemy will engage them rather than the other destroyers coming behind them. And it's the same with the Didos, supporting those destroyers. You're supposed to be targeting them. So you forget to target the destroyers, which are going to kill you with the torpedoes. And please note, this is not in any way detracting from Taffy 3 and the bravery and heroism of them and the personnel involved and all they did. But I do think is in a scenario here, it's a case of, to me, not having Atlanta there, not having one of these there as a command vessel is a problem. Nightbot does get testy sometimes. Nightbot does. But yeah, the thing is, Samar, the Battle of Samar is one of those operations where you sit there and go, okay, there are so many options for the Americans which would have been good. It's like, again, imagine Samar if an Alaska had been available and been there as a flagship, or something else which was designed to be an independent command ship of small groups, and have those facilities. When we look at that force, you've got 6 escort carriers, 3 destroyers, and 4 destroyer escorts sitting out on their own. Not one of those ships is what I would call a command ship. This is a command ship for destroyers. That was part of the reason it was built. That's part of its role. So that being said, And noticing that we are approaching the 2 hour and 45 minute mark and getting on to the 3 hour mark when, you know, at some point I will open up to questions. I'll do questions for half an hour, then I'll have a break, and then I'll be on Discord if anyone wants more has more questions. And I'll be on Discord for a couple of hours chatting away. Were they worth it? Were they worth it? I would say your answer comes after the war. The search for 6-inch cruisers which have true dual-purpose weapons to me shows the lessons of World War II. The lessons of the Didos and of the Atlantas. In that you need to have a cruiser-level weaponry to justify building a cruiser over a destroyer. You really do. You really do. I think if the Tigers had come out looking like closer to Atlanta, i.e. they'd have a lot of 4.5-inch guns, the Rendezvous would have had a lot more darings, they wouldn't have had any Tigers. And that's the thing. The Tigers work because they got a dual-purpose 6-inch gun. The Worcester class work because they have a dual-purpose 6-inch gun. It's not as good as the 8-inch auto gun. And yes, there are interesting problems with the 6-inch AA guns autos because of the fact they are supposed to be truly dual-purpose weapons for AA engagement and the speed required and maneuver required for engaging jets at this point. And scenarios. But the thing is, they're still part of this fleet plan. They're still part of the analysis because they've done that service during the war. And again, I prefer to think of them as screening cruisers rather than AA cruisers. Because in the nicest way, these ships are designed to deal with surface threats and air threats. Whether they're small, light surface threats coming in fast or air threats coming in fast, these are designed to engage them with maximum lethality. Maximum lethality. And again, I would say in many ways these ships are being built to excise memories of that conflict. Now, that to me says they were worth it. The fact that the navies were still trying to build ships to do the role after World War II. After all that experience of war, after all that analysis. Ultimately, they do make more sense in a scenario where you can't build enough destroyers. The reason the British don't pump out more of them is they are pumping out lots of battle class and war emergency destroyers and other things during the war, so they don't need to pump out more Didos during the war. And honestly, the 5.25 versus the 4.7 and the 4.5, it's not enough advantage. But once you have a dual-purpose 6, it's that square cube law coming in. It's that annoying square cube law coming in. The difference in value between a 5-inch and a 6-inch is really, really noticeable. The difference between a 4.7-inch, 4.5-inch and a 6-inch is incredibly noticeable. The difference between a 4.7-inch, 4.5-inch and a 5.25-inch is not as noticeable. Not as valuable. So this is why the dual-purpose 6 is the holy grail. And if you want to imagine a really interesting idea, you have to remember that the work on that turret, I'm never quite so sure about this turret design, but that turret design I know starts being theorized and talked about in the early 1930s. They don't get much farther, but they're starting to work on the idea already in the early 1930s. So there is a scenario whereby the Didos are armed with 4 twin auto 6-inch guns, dual purpose. And where the Arrowfusers and pretty much every light cruiser that are all 6-inch light cruiser that are all Navy builds from about the Arrowfusers onwards is armed with dual purpose auto 6-inch guns, if they managed to get the idea from the theoretical stage to the practical stage. And even if they're, let's say, 90% as effective as those guns, but would be simpler because they wouldn't build them as complicated, so probably be more reliable than those 6-inch guns, less temperamental, because simpler does tend to make them more reliable. Imagine the change in World War II. But also, there is the very real scenario that you don't have the 5.25-inch guns, you don't have the Didos. Because one of the reasons you have the screening cruisers come out is the reality that the 6-inch cruisers, as fast as they fire, as capable as 6-inch cruisers are, they can't put up the volume of fire required for screening against the mass destroyer attacks and the mass air attacks which are feared from the mid-1930s onwards. And isn't that a sad thing, Devon Bronco? Why don't we have an Atlanta class as a museum ship? They're good ships, their crews are hard-working, they give themselves loyally for their nation when they're needed to, and yet they haven't been preserved. I know there's no Dido either, but we're talking about the Royal Navy here. We don't even maintain a tribal. We don't have a battleship. You know, if I want to go for the most recent British-built battleship, which is still alive in the world, I have to go to Japan. It's called the Mikasa. So it doesn't really count. But you Americans, you actually do maintain your ships. You actually do have a proper museum ship network. I'd love to spend some time going around there. I haven't managed to get the money and the time to go and do a proper tour of America and see your ships and present them. That's one of the things which I will keep fundraising towards, because I'd love to have the money to go and out there and see them. And as a tourist, rather than just driving past because I'm there for work. I hate myself sometimes. I'm really cruel to myself, because I will drive past these things, go, oh, that's cool. Can't go there. Got to get to work. If I was slightly less ethical, I would go, oh, I ran out of fuel, or oh, the car was playing up and I had to pull into a car park. Sorry, I'll be a couple of hours late. But I'm not. Dang. I hate myself sometimes. Oh. Yeah, don't get me started on the submarines. Yeah. Oh, it's just... Yeah. But these shits were worth it. Anyway. Question time. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to borrow something. Now, there's no... The comment bot isn't really working, so please don't think it's the comment bot. But basically, I'm just using this sign to go... I'm now answering questions for about, let's say half an hour. Yeah, I wouldn't be able to resist blogging, no. But however, there was a time before I had a YouTube channel when I traveled, because remember, I've had the YouTube channel since 2020, because I set up during COVID. I did most of my traveling in America, we're talking 10 years ago, when I basically had Twitter and Instagram, but not much else. And yeah, I'd have probably kept my mouth shut, because, you know, in that time I wasn't doing the stuff I was doing, which was social media dependent. I would love that, Haze Grey. I would love that. Ooh, question received, Aruron. How's your dog doing? Everything okay? Yeah, they're doing okay. They're doing well. They're enjoying their lives at the moment. Riley's not in here at the moment because, honestly, I've had work all day, consultations, and they don't tend to like the dog being in. So Friday is not my favourite day of the week. It's the day of the week when I don't tend to have a doggy with me, and I find it a bit cruel. But yeah, it's just easier. They don't you know, what you don't realize is I spend most of the day in a smart shirt, and I literally take the smart shirt off, put a t-shirt on, and that's my Friday evening wear. There's a very real reason why I always do these videos in a t-shirt rather than a smart shirt, because it's the smart shirt is for when I'm consulting, when I'm at a university lecturing, and I'm in that mode, and the t-shirt is for when I'm in the more approachable mode, it's considered, because I do notice when the shipshape crew have seen me in a smart shirt and have seen me working, they tell me I become very professional, Alex. And apparently it's not exactly it's not unapproachable or cold, but it's not the same. It's not as if my personality changes, but it's as if I emphasize different parts of my personality. It's sort of I put on a different role, sort of thing. So I very much made sure I was in a t-shirt for doing this evening. But yeah, Doggy's not been in here because I've been consulting all day. Yes, fluffy research assistants. They are very good at that. Oh. Well, I will open up the Discord server so I can watch and see if there are questions coming in. And if there are questions coming in, I will look at them, but I won't display them because that's not what we're sort of doing here. But it will be interesting. I will save that for thing. But it'll be interesting to see if it works, because if it is working, then in future we know not to start. We know not to start the app till after we're live, because obviously it doesn't like it. Oh! Now, hello. Oh, I've got them in. Now, here's the interesting thing, Cody88. It's working on YouTube tonight, but it's not working on Twitch. Because it's got all the YouTube questions, but it's not getting any of the Twitch questions. They're all logged in as YouTube, all logged in. Oh, Runon's got through, so yeah. He just put in the prompt wrong. Okay. Okay. All right, so it's working. It's all working. So let's do the questions. Knight Signature, is it accurate to say the Tide class were the final victims of naval treaties? No. They're the final victims of... Well, they're not the final victims. They're ongoing victims of the British government. Honestly, they're ongoing victims of the Royal Navy trying to make a ship which the British government will allow them to buy in sufficient numbers, whilst also having sufficient capability to be viable for the Royal Navy needs, but not being excessive. And realistically, what the Royal Navy would have liked would have been a slightly bigger vessel with at least 3 of the 6-inch turrets, and as well as 4 of the 3-inch turrets. And probably would have had an ABC position, with 2 twin 6 forward, and then a 3-inch in C, and you know, sort of it positioned sort of that way. But yeah, they shrunk it down, they got it to work, and it was working. Again, ideally they'd want a bigger vessel with more command facilities, and it would have been lasted for a lot longer. But yeah, things are fun sometimes. Things are fun. Did the Italians get anywhere with their 66mm medium AA, the World War II ones? Not many good places. Let's see. The 1939 one, It's one of those guns which is cancelled in 1943. It has all sorts of interesting opportunities, but honestly, the problem the Italians have, and they really do have in this scenario, is that they also are developing things like the 65 millimeter, 65, 66 millimeter. It's the basic same one. It is the same one. It's 65, broadly speaking. Hang on, you called it 66. Yeah, it's 65. Brain engage. But they had issues. And they were fitted to some ships. They were theoretically going to be very capable, but mostly they're only deployed on the Capitani Romani, and mostly they don't achieve a lot. They really don't achieve a lot. Because, well, how do I put this? There's a reason no one really sticks with the 66 post-war. Because the 66 is theoretically a very good point, like the 10-inch, but it doesn't work out as being a good point. And that's why we end up with the 76, the 3-inch. Because of the rate of fire, the actual amount of explosives you can carry, the actual amount of damage it will do when it balances out. Because it's kind of like the 40mm versus the 45mm. There's no point. 57mm versus 66. Okay, 57mm's got better rate of fire, and it's more reliable. Okay, 76 is got a heavier firepower. Theoretically, the 66 is roughly in the middle of those guns, so that should be a really good sweet spot. And the reality is, nope, it's not. Theoretically, the 66 is your sweet spot between your 57mm and your 76mm in terms of viability, and will give you the best of both worlds. It doesn't. And added that, complications in production made it even more difficult. Cody, how hard is it to convert YT series light transports into torpedo bomber light gunships? YT series, YT. You're going to have to give me more clarification on that, because I'm presuming that's the ones from... I'm presuming that's a Star Wars question. And theoretically, the light freighters wouldn't be that difficult to do, because they've got some modular capabilities, and they've got some interesting stuff. And there is the fact that there are versions of the YT which are very close to pirate ship already, but I haven't honestly done a lot of study on that. Okay. Ooh, got lots of questions coming. Most of the questions come in onto the system, which is good. Okay, so I'm going to... go... Ooh. You're probably better going off of electronic warfare than flak. Oh, they often have both. In a nice way, have both. Why not? Oh, thank you, Haze Grey. I'll have a look at that later. The auxiliary anti-aircraft cruisers, Kevin Ray, are an interesting one. They are something which comes up during the war. They're mainly things for escorting convoys on the coast. They're usually converted merchant steamers, sometimes even merchant paddle wheel steamers, and they are useful. They provide the extra firepower they need when they need it. And basically, again, it's about a convoy escort thing. We're doing coastal convoys. We know they're going to get hit. using one of the big valuable cruisers for this is not sensible. It's just going to be an attrition rate. So we'll put something which we don't want to lose, but if we lose, we can afford to lose as the AA Vasset to provide enough heavy AA and basically the heavy AA on the convoy escorts, especially the coastal convoy escorts, is about providing enough deterrence factor that the aircraft aren't going to come in small numbers at low. They're going to come in heavy enough numbers. They're going to be seen by radar a long way out, and so you'll have fighters intercepting them. So basically, it's all about how you cooperate with chain home and the fighter command position. Thank you for the bless yous for the sneeze. And let's see. Do AA cruisers make a comeback to cope with drone swarm attacks? Probably not, but as I've said before, I can see things like the Type 31s with their emphasis on 57 and 40mm being testimony for what's come, and the Italians have always had a heavy 76mm basis. I think you're probably going to see lasers, but you're also going to see a lot more guns coming back in terms of the medium cannon. I wouldn't be surprised if some of the future designs and some of the stuff I've seen discussing for the Type 83 have included a heavy secondary armament of guns, not just the main deck gun. So it's not going to go back to a scenario like the Type 23 where you only have the 4.5, pretty much the 4.5 inch gun and the 30mm sitting on the side, which can basically do not much. You know, that's going to be what they have. Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm. The flagship. Ah, yes, the Gelderland. So yeah, the Gelderland is converted into the Niobe, which is basically a mobile flak platform. And the Gelderland was a Dutch Holland-class protected cruiser, originally laid down in 1897 and commissioned in 1900. It was seized by the Germans in March 1941 after it had been decommissioned in May 1900. And they converted it to Niobe, which had a top speed of 16 knots, had 2 flak rangefinders, and was armed with 2 150mm guns, 6 120mm guns, 6 75mm guns, 8 37mm guns, and some revolver 37mm guns. No, hang on, no, that's the Gelderland, so I'm sorry, getting it wrong. 8 105mm guns, 4 40mm guns, and 4 20mm guns. As a flak frigate, sorry, reading off the wrong notes. Sort of going, hang on, these guns sound weird for the notes. Oh, good lord, I'm reading off the wrong notes. This is the problem of reading someone else's notes, because I went, hang on, Niobe, typed into my system, went, ah, good. I have a friend called Daniel, not any of the Daniels you know, who is obsessed with the Dutch Navy. And I've got all his notes on Dutch Navy ships and what happened to them, so I'm just reading his notes. So, Daniel, you'll know who you are, because you're also the guy who sends me lovely chocolates, thank you. And in return, I send him Cornish ice cream. I am using your notes. Thank you. I just have to make sure you have tables in your notes. Just have them set up separately. Don't have them next to each other. It confuses poor dyslexics which are using half a screen. It's cruelty, Daniel. Anyway, 8 105mm. Yeah, it's basically being used because you need things to provide air defense. You need to be able to provide air defense as a counter. You need to be able to provide air defense of various positions. And an air defense ship is often the easiest way to do it because you can bring the firepower, you can bring the supplies, the maintenance, all the things to sustain those guns with them. So basically it's a floating, self-propelled flak platform, but that's it. It's not got 88s though, which is really kind of sad. Adam, if I think there's there's a question system in, and I'm going to keep the questions open for a little bit longer, and then I will close them and answer all the questions. So basically, I'm watching the question numbers coming in, but it's a good way for me to if this does work in future. This is what I'll do. Whenever we get to the question section, I will open up the Q&A. I will open up the bot and go, yay, bot time. I think, Adam, I think you have too many question marks in your one. But if I do paste from Adam, that should go through. And yeah, that's it. Now got that. I know I actually got that in duplicate, but you know, because the system I have goes into both chats. Yeah, it's the one without 88. For that, oh. I'd save that question 96831 on the F-35 for Sunday, because that would be a good one to discuss with the panel. I think someone's already clearing up my system for me. I'm not sure if it's the bot or if it's Runon, but thank you. So I've done that one. I've done that one. I've done that one on the Tiger class. Manly 640. As the different scenario at Samar, imagine if Halsey had not gone north with Third Fleet. Well, that would have been a very different scenario, but that's a massively different scenario. That's maneuvering a whole different fleet into the way. And that turns Samar probably into a battle of annihilation between the Americans and the Japanese. But that's the whole thing. The Japanese don't get enough credit for Samar because their whole thing was they were trying to do was try to cause people to be moving out the way so they would get through. Yeah. Runon is the bot queen. That's Runon. Runon's the bot queen. I'd like to point out the threatening to send Runon to Hosh is something Runon has programmed into the bot. Because it came through and I didn't type it. So it's either the bot's got sentient or Runon programmed that into the bot. From Adam C. And that's because... Adam, I would love to be able to pronounce your name, but I would honestly mangle it. So I hope you don't mind it. I think it's Czechowski. I would say, but I'm probably pronouncing it terribly wrong. So I'm going to go with Adam C. Do you think the Atlantas would have been produced more or longer if the 5-inch 54 cal guns were produced earlier with the Atlantas? Yes. Because that would have made them different enough to make them valuable on their own versus the destroyers. If you have enough of those 5-inch 54s, they can only be used for the cruisers because they are big enough they require a cruiser for it, then that's going to work. And that's the reality of it. If you have enough of those assets, that makes the case for you. It's a different. It's the difference between a Dido and Atlanta. Is a Dido has that 5.25, and that's just different enough from the British destroyer guns that it is a cruiser, and it is capable of acting as a cruiser. The 5-inch 54 is just capable enough from the 5-inch 38 that gives it a differential that makes it worthwhile having. It gives you just that bit extra range, just that bit a bit more firepower. It's useful. And it's easier to fit on a cruiser than it is on a destroyer at that time. Yeah. It's always nicer to keep the questions related to more general things for brew ships on Sunday, because that's a fun thing to have for brew ships on Sunday. It keeps brew ships on Sunday kind of special. And remember, this brew ships this Sunday is the 5th year anniversary of brew ships. It's the 5-year anniversary of brew ships as a ongoing series. So that's going to be a fun one. And I have passed this on to the rest of the shipshape crew, and some of them might be turning up. There's also a possibility that you will have in-person extra shipshape personnel here the following Sunday, because the 2 Dans are on their way down, hopefully, next weekend. Not this weekend, but next weekend. They're going to be on their way down. They're going to be down for Sunday. So after hopefully surviving my sister's Sunday roast, they will be joining us. I might not be doing a Twitch stream that Sunday morning, because I might be doing stuff with them. They've offered to do sorts of things here, but yeah. Okay. Runon, you're coming a bit obsessed. Water Brothers, Hoofy, what we learned from such affair, and that just flushed up and that's disappeared. Yeah, it went. I'm presuming, Walter, you're saving that for Sunday. Or Runon's saving that for Sunday, because that would be a fun one to discuss on Sunday. But I will do a bit of a broad thing from it. One, I would say what we're learning so far is that the old lessons in terms of aircraft management on flight decks are still true. And that sometimes, if you have, sometimes we think the new systems are going to change things, and they haven't. You're saving for Sunday. Well, I'll discuss this in more detail Sunday, but I'll give you a quick pro-say now, is basically what I'm going to do, as you did ask it now. I'd also say what we're learning from the Heavies is that, and this is going to sound terrible, but what we're learning is really we have been underestimating the number of assets we need. We have been underestimating the number of assets we need. And this has been part of the end of history stuff, and it's something I'll get into, but basically the idea was, in the nicest way, peer threats there weren't going to be that many peer threats at sea, so we didn't have to have that many high-end assets to manage them. And suddenly it's become, of course, with drones and the other systems, there's been a lot of democratization in terms of weaponry. And so actually you need more of these fighting vessels, but it's going to take a time for governments to realize they need to spend more. I need to invest more. And now you put in a question for tonight. Did the Axis navies ever try AA cruiser concepts? They did consider them. But the OBA is a classic example of what the Germans actually did. And honestly, the Italians never really had much of an option, never really had enough numbers that they could generate purpose-built AA cruisers. And I would argue that the only really purpose AA cruisers, the only ones the Royal Navy considered AA cruisers in World War II, were the converted C-class and the converted Ds. They didn't consider the Didos to be AA cruisers. They were screening cruisers, and they were perfectly capable of surface combat. And the U.S. Navy, I'd argue, the same with the Atlantas. They considered them screening cruisers, part of their wider destroyer force. They don't necessarily consider them AA cruisers. We consider them AA cruisers when we look back at them, when we look at their weaponry, when we look at what their mission and weaponry profile was, and it makes sense for them to be AA cruisers because aircraft are growing in this power and this capability coming. But they're screening cruisers. They're about screening for the threats that were likely to be there, whether they are small boat threats, destroyer threats, or aircraft threats, and that's what their firepower was about, and that's what these vessels are continuing. These vessels are continuing their screening capabilities. But yeah. Anyway, that's been about half an hour on questions. And I've been broadcasting for roughly 3 hours and 20 minutes tonight. So I'm going to say thank you to everyone. We have got some cool videos coming. As said, this week you're going to have Jellicoe and Sheer come out on Tuesday and Wednesday. Hopefully I'll get Sheer recorded tomorrow. Jellicoe's already in the can recorded, as is tomorrow's videos are already recorded and is ready to go up, and you should enjoy tomorrow's video. It's another exploration on 1930s leadership. And yeah, the thing is, there are questions coming up. There is, if we go back to the winners, and this is something which I would like to emphasize, if we go back to the winners of the votes, you might notice that one of the questions coming up for, when is it? July is David Forthwaite. How's Ukraine war confirmed, dispelled, or updated Falklands lessons? And that received 17 votes. And that's going to be an interesting one for me to get into because, as said, the Ukraine war is still live, and think of also still adapting and changing and evolving to adapt to focus on each other. So it's going to be an interesting one to get because I'm going to present it very much as this is a current analysis based on what we currently know. This might change with more information coming. So this is not an end of conflict. We have all the information. We can therefore do a full analysis and be 100%. This is a ongoing analysis, which is also an interesting thing to do. Got that coming up. That's going to be in July, and as said, August, September vote will be done soon, and probably August and September they'll be done separately. So it'll be a vote for August and then vote for September, and yeah, it'll be good. And don't worry, the Houthi question, I've read your Houthi question point, and that's why I went to this, because they're going to be good. Anyway, thank you very much, everyone, for watching. Hope you enjoyed, and thank you for your supporting the channel, liking, sharing, subscribing, all those things. And as said, I'm going to be, the Thursday lives carry on. I know this one got moved to Friday, but that's because of VE Day. There's video coming out tomorrow. There'll be Brew Ships on Sunday, which will be the 5-year anniversary of Brew Ships. And then there'll be Jellicoe and Sheer on Tuesday and Wednesday next week. There'll be the Thursday live. There'll also be a premiere coming out next week, as I might well, rather than doing a Key Ships or Key, I might do Takedomis's Mad Destroyer Captains on Friday, because that's a pretty cool one to do. And that was supposed to come out next week, but as I've put Sheer to the Wednesday, I can't do that on the Wednesday I was planning to do. So I might well do that next Friday. And so next week should be a pretty good, fun for the various series. I'm not sure what next Thursday lives is. If I check, next Thursday's live stream is I do know it's a fun one, but I'm trying to remember it. Oh yeah. Next Thursday, the 15th of May, is a turtle ship May, Yi Sun Sin. I thought that would be a fun one to have to contrast with Jellicoe and Sheer to talk about Yi Sun Sin. So that's next Thursday's videos, turtle ships. So next week you could have destroyer captains, turtle ships, Jellicoe and Sheer. I think that's going to be a fun week. Thank you very much, everyone, for watching. Looking forward to seeing you Sunday. Take care and have fun. Toodles. And I know I should say this because if I don't, Sal will tell me off. Please do, if you like the video, like, share, and subscribe. It really does help the channel grow. And always remember, for all content creators, this one I'm about to say matters. That subscribe button on YouTube and I think the one on Twitch is the same, have variable options for being alerted about, notified about us going live and us having videos. If it's filled in with a bell, the bell's filled in on YouTube, you get notified of all of my videos. And if you've got notifications turned on your phone or computer, you'll get those notifications come through. And that means you get to choose what videos you watch, not YouTube. Anything less than that bell fully filled in, YouTube's algorithm starts to decide how much you're going to get to see. Take care, everyone. Have fun, and hope you enjoyed.